What's going on, everybody? Welcome to the Awesemo.com Saturday Strategy Show. It's Wild Card Weekend, and we got 3 games kicking it off today, starting at 1 o'clock Eastern Time. I'm Dave Loughran at Loughy_D on Twitter, LOUGHY_D. And with me, as always, still got a few more weeks of this to go, Ben Rasa at JazzRaz DFS and Alex Baker, #1 ranked DFS player at Awesemo DFS. Alex, what's going on, man?
Not much. Really interesting slate. And the best part about this one is if we don't get it quite right, we get another shot tomorrow. So, in fact, also, we got a ton of showdown, and then the 6-game slate. It's like, man, this is a DFS wet dream today.
Yeah, Ben, they have, at least on DraftKings, I saw yesterday that they had a $400,000 contest for the Saturday and Sunday slate. So we're only doing the Saturday slate today, but we already did a full matchup show on Thursday for both of them. Alex and I with Steve did a full on the contrary strategy show type deal yesterday with all 6 games, but today focusing on 3 games. What's going on, man?
Nothing. Yeah, this is obviously super wild card weekend. Pretty cool. Good games. A lot of questions. I'm not going to lie. I wish we had more information, but you know what? Everyone's in the same boat. You can still take advantage of that, and we're going to talk about how to do that.
And of course, we're happy to have all of you guys with us. Hit that thumbs up if you haven't done so yet, and help us, more importantly, get to 50,000 subscribers. We are so close. You can smell it. I think we're at like 47.7 now, 47.8, 47. I don't know. It's close. We're going to get there by the Super Bowl, thanks to all of your help and all the support along the way. But more importantly, if there's anything you like about what we do here, whether it's the free content, whether you think Ben is handsome and you just like watching him on screen, I don't know, whatever it is, hit that subscribe button. We greatly appreciate it. And you'll always know when we go live. You'll show up in the recommended feed, the browse feature, all of that great stuff, so you never miss another show. All right, let's dive into it. Ben, I'll kick it off with you. The Indianapolis Colts at Buffalo, hosting their first playoff game in quite some time because, well, the Patriots always win the division. They are 6.5-point favorites, 51-point total. You're looking at a Bills team that has been virtually unstoppable lately, but a Colts squad that defensively has been able to put some pieces together and has a pretty good run game. Phillip Rivers just hasn't shown a ton of upside this year. So let's start with him, and let's start with the passing game for the Colts and how you see this game playing out as 6.5-point dogs.
Yeah, Buffalo, you could easily argue that they're playing better than anybody. They've just been absolutely fantastic. Josh Allen and the offense we'll get to, but the defense has also been more than serviceable. They're at home. They have everything you want. There is no excuse for them to lose this game. The spread's actually moving. It's ticking to 7 in some spots. But in terms of what the Colts are going to do, we'll get to the backfield because I think what they really want to do is lean on Jonathan Taylor. But if they fall behind and they're forced to throw, difficult thing about the Colts is they distribute the ball a lot. T.Y. Hilton, of course, probably the leader on the outside. You also may get the most Tre'Davious White, which isn't ideal. Then you've got Pascal and Pittman. You've got the tight ends. You've got Hines. So it's a tough sell for me to really hone in on some Colts pass catchers. More of a one-off situation because it's pretty likely to me that they will be trailing.
All right. Maybe it's because they think you're handsome, Alex, because Travis says, I'm so happy Awesemo shaved the stash. Coming in clean shaven today. Looking good, fella.
Thanks, man. Hopefully playoff beard isn't what I needed today. But this game should be pretty good. Indianapolis has been a great team. The AFC was really competitive this year, so they really just snuck into the playoffs. But their stats have been good on the offensive and defensive end. The only problem is Buffalo has been on another level. Their passing attack this year has been off the chart. And this one should be a good one. I think probably one of the best DFS games of the weekend.
Yeah, I think so too. Thank you, by the way, for the super chat. William, he says, Ben looks like Blankenship. LOL. Love all you boys. Thanks for the information. You get that one a lot. I think that might be your biggest comp that we've got.
Yeah, I get that. I get Baker. But when I wear glasses, I go to the Colts side of the ball. So
I love
change it up once in a blue moon. So I can live with that.
I love it. Let me stick, Alex, with you on this Colts game or the Colts side of the ball for a second, because once we get to these next two games, we don't even know who the starting quarterback is for one of the teams. At least with this one, we have a little bit of clarity. You know, when I look at ownership and I see Phillip Rivers coming in at pretty low ownership, given the circumstances, it's such a small slate. You know, where's he at right now? Let me make sure I can refresh it to see if we updated recently. Yeah. Okay. So we updated an hour ago. We have Rivers at 10%. Really, that's 10% among what? 4 quarterbacks? Because I have no idea what's going on among the other ones. And do you want to start them anyway, considering they're not nearly at full health? Phillip Rivers is around 10%. This is using our Awesemo.com ownership projections. T.Y. Hilton is around 38%. He's up there. But then you got Pittman at 10%. Naeem Hines is can't be high, at 8 or 17%. You would think, at least I would, maybe I'm wrong, Alex, that in this game with a 50-plus point total, where they're likely going to be playing from behind it, maybe these guys would be getting more ownership.
Yeah. Oh, shoot. My bad.
I lost you.
I think it's just like the Colts. There's no one fantasy player that's really a stud. I mean, Jonathan Taylor kind of stands out, but against the Bills, like he could get phased out, and he's not as active receiving the ball, where Naeem Hines really shines. So I think there's a lot of different ways you can go, and not any of them are going to be like particularly popular. But one nice thing, the Colts have run a pretty deep wide receiver rotation, but last week in their must-win game, we only really saw 3 guys. We saw Hilton and Pittman, and then Pascal's snap counts have gone way up over the year. He was in the 90+%. So I think this one's pretty stackable. And the good thing about Rivers is it's not like he's going to get rushing production. If he gets there, it's solely through his receivers. So you're basically getting a 3-for-1 if you hit that one.
All right, so let's talk just a little bit more about Jonathan Taylor. Ben, he's been very good lately. The production has certainly been there. He's coming off a 253-yard rushing game in Week 17 when they just kind of closed out the season with a 14-point win against the Jaguars. Prior to that, 18 for 74 and 2 scores against Pittsburgh, 16 for 83 and a touchdown. And then if you go back to that Week 14 win against Vegas, he had 150 yards and 2 scores on 20 carries. So if we've seen anything here, the volume has been there pretty significantly going back all the way to Week 11. And the touchdowns, he scored 7 rushing touchdowns over his last 4 games with multiple touchdowns in 3 of his last 4. Can he maintain that similar production today against the Bills would be the question.
Yeah, I mean, that is obviously the big question. It's a tough one to answer. What I feel pretty confident is he's going to have at least opportunities. Obviously, the longer they stay in the game, if they win the game, you could see him push for, we saw against Jacksonville, 30 carries. That's massive. But that's what they want to do. The big worry is what happens if the Bills come out and do what they've been doing and it's 21-3 early. Does Hines slowly take over? It's not like Taylor can't catch the ball, but certainly that's not what they want to utilize him for. The thing about this slate, because I do think we have to talk about it in just general terms because it's a 3-gamer, price really isn't an issue. So you're going to be able to get these guys. It's not like there's a big opportunity cost to Taylor. You're really just evaluating him kind of on his own merit. It's not like, oh, if I play him, then I can't get to all these other guys. It's pretty much a pick 'em barring a few permutations.
By the way, this show does not move the needle, as people are saying. And I promise you, to think that this show or any other shows are significantly moving any needle, it's not the case. But Alex, any final thoughts on the Colts?
Yeah, that's always been a funny narrative in
like
DFS.
We're heavily swaying ownership.
Yeah, I mean,
I wish I could do that.
It's like you can make the greatest point in the world, and like a lot of people just like, they'll just pick whoever they're gonna pick anyway. So, I mean, I think Jonathan Taylor is a solid play. If you do play him, you're getting a ton of leverage over the Bills, where obviously the games where Taylor is going to really excel are the ones where he's getting, 30 rushing attempts. And then that's going to really drive down the play volume for the Bills. And since Diggs and Josh Allen are two of the most popular players on today's slate, that could be a chance that's worth taking with Taylor.
You're muted, Luffy.
Apologies. The dog started going wild.
Yeah, I heard him. He's getting agitated.
She's very agitated. What are you gonna do? I just fed her too. She's full. Whatever. Let's talk about the Bills. Ben, the one concern coming into this game is Cole Beasley going to be active? But now from everything I'm seeing, Stephon Diggs and Cole Beasley are expected to play. So, any thoughts you had about getting some Isaiah McKenzie, maybe run hot 2 games in a row, or maybe some more opportunity out of Gabriel Davis, all of that good stuff. I think we can kind of put that on the back burner. Maybe Davis gets a couple opportunities, but John Brown's healthy now as well. So they're going to have all 3 of their starting wide receivers. Josh Allen has been on fire lately. They really would like to not have to use the run game heavily unless they're up by 1,000 points. And even in that case, they're still running the ball very infrequently. So that just kind of all makes them look like a very good passing attack, no matter who they're facing, even in a tough matchup against the Colts. What do you say?
Oh, there's no doubt. I mean, this offense has shown it doesn't really matter who's on the other side of the ball. And the Colts, listen, they're a decent defense. They're missing a couple key pieces. I worry more about, trying to run through the Colts than pass. They're kind of a funnel defense, play that zone. The problem is, it's not a problem, but it's just you're going to have a lot of guys, and we've seen injuries and other things kind of move pieces for the Bills. So we don't really get a clear picture of what do they do when everyone's at full strength. Is Beasley going to be limited anyway? Is Diggs going to be limited in any way? Because they have guys that clearly have shown they can step up, like Gabriel Davis, McKenzie. These guys would be fantastic value if they get the volume. I don't know if they get that if these other guys are good to go. So again, it's easy to afford Diggs. Obviously, he's going to be busy. Josh Allen, top play on the slate at quarterback, not breaking any news there. It's just, do you want to go to a third guy? Do you want to bring in Dawson Knox? Those are the type of one-offs within the stack that I think could separate if you get it right.
Sure. And Alex, the 2 highest projected owned players right now on this slate are Stephon Diggs and Josh Allen at 1 and 2 respectively.
Definitely. And they really deserve that because the Bills, they've been exceptional passing the ball. Allen's at 7.9 yards per attempt. And they pass the ball at a very high volume, one of the highest in the league. So when they do score, it's usually by passing. So I feel a lot of confidence in the Bills. I have them as almost like around a 50% chance of being the top stack on this 6-game slate, if I remember. I'll just pull up the top stacks real quick to double check that. 50.4%. We project Josh Allen to be 42% owned. He's the most expensive though, but still like that potential is huge. So I'm not crossing them off due to high ownership, but the 2 guys that I feel the least confident in are guys that have some buzz. So I want to mention this. Isaiah McKenzie. Last week he played 95% of the snaps, which was very unusual. And part of it was because of the fact they already had that playoff spot locked up, and Cole Beasley also didn't play. If you go back to when John Brown and Cole Beasley both played, he's in the 10% range. So unless he gets another return touchdown, like he would totally bust on most nights. If he wasn't coming off a 30-point performance, I wouldn't really worry about his ownership, but now I'm kind of worried that maybe people are chasing. The other guy I'm looking at fading is Dawson Knox. Now, he's another guy that early in the season when the 3 receivers were healthy, he barely was out on the field at all. Between 30 to 50% of the passing plays he ran a route on. That number increased over the last few weeks, but I'm worried that as the receivers get more healthy, we're going to see less tight ends because Buffalo uses a tight end at one of the lower rates in the league.
Okay. Yeah. All good points. I think the only thing I think about Knox or really any of these tight ends that's viable is it feels like the only time they're used is in the red zone. I know Dawson Knox, of course, last week with 8 targets and he's been getting more opportunities, but like you mentioned, Alex, John Brown being out, and having some injuries to that wide receiving core definitely helped him out a bit. But yeah, if Dawson Knox is going to be even remotely popular, I have no problem getting away from that. Anything else, Ben, for Buffalo? If you want to hit on the run game, although there's just really no ability to predict whether it's going to be Singletary, whether it's going to be Moss, or whether it's going to be neither of them each week.
There you go. I mean, what do I say every week? Tough spot because there's a real chance that Buffalo has no production on the ground. If they do, then you're still in a coin toss. So that's just a very difficult thing. Now, obviously, the one thing to speak positively, if one of them has a huge game and you go that route, you're also killing the most popular stack in some fashion. Like that comes directly at the expense of Josh Allen and these guys. So you get it right twice. That's a big payoff, but man, there's a low percentage chance that happens.
Alex, same question to you. Any interest in the run game for Buffalo today?
I think I might lay off Singletary and Moss because we've seen in these previous short slates, they've kind of had some fluky games, and maybe that'll drive up the ownership a tiny bit. If you look at it on face value, you're like, Buffalo is one of the biggest favorites, and you might want to look at a running back in that situation. So people might kind of just think Buffalo running back and pick them, but from a projection standpoint, they really don't pop at all. So I'm going to look elsewhere.
All right, let's keep it moving then. Before we do, though, first, Ben, let me ask you your top plays from this game. And do you have any interesting there's a few bets that I really like for the Sunday games, player props. I got a couple for this week, for the Saturday game as well, but not in this one. Anything you see that interests you outside of DFS?
So I do think that the Bills make a nice teaser piece. I think they win this game. I'm not looking to lay a touchdown. My favorite prop in the game is the under for T.Y. Hilton. I think that Tre'Davious White really focuses on him. Rivers will go elsewhere with the ball. Other than that, in terms of my favorite plays from the game, not breaking any news here. It's Josh Allen and these pass catchers, Jonathan Taylor on the other side.
Oddshopper.awesemo.com. It's awesome. It's free. It's on the screen right now. You can check all of that out. Although, Jordan, maybe go to NFL and not basketball, but aside from that, we're looking good. Jordan Klein producing the show, doing a good job as always. Outside of that, Alex, do you have anything for this game before we move on?
As far as bets, I'm pulling up the props tool here. Always can get some interesting ones. I see the prop for Jonathan Taylor rushing on one site is 79.5. I think that you can take the under there. I feel like the chance that the Colts dominate this game is pretty low. And then despite the fact they've run the ball a lot this year, like in neutral game scripts, their rushing rate is a little bit below average. So I just don't feel like the volume is going to be there on a normal day.
All right. And yes, Dave, we do answer questions from the chat when we can. Next show, however, coming up immediately after us, live before locked, it's going straight up till that 1:00 kickoff, 1:05 kickoff. They'll answer a lot more questions, and that show is a lot more focused on questions from chat and helping you all out in that respect as well. So be sure to stick around for that right after this. All right, Ben, LA Rams and Seattle Seahawks. I don't know what to make here. I don't know if it's going to be Goff or I don't know if it's or Walford starting. And I mean, I suppose it makes a difference. I don't know how big of a difference, right? It's not like you're taking Aaron Rodgers or Patrick Mahomes off the field. You're taking Jared Goff off the field. But I'm willing to admit that it is still a downgrade, okay? I don't want to shit on Goff too much. I'm just saying that he hasn't been particularly great. And most of these Rams games have gone under lately. And I think all but one of the Seahawks games has gone under since week 10. You've heard me say it a million times throughout the week when we talk about this game. The Seahawks look like an entirely different team from the first to the second half of the season. Better offense, worse defense early. Defense has improved. Offense has completely collapsed in the latter stages of the year. So I could absolutely see this game going under. I know 42.5 points is a low number already, but I like this to be a very low scoring affair. I just don't see how they're able to muster scoring on either side. Rams, great run defense, great pass defense. Their passers either going to have a busted up hand or it's going to be a guy named John Walford. And on the other side, what have the Seahawks shown us over the past 8 games that we can really hang our hats on? That's enough for me, Ben, but I have a read on this game. And if I'm right, it'll mean I don't have a ton of this outside of maybe some Cam Akers, maybe a little Carson and some sprinkles of receivers.
We just saw these teams and it was 20-9, which speaks to what you're saying. The Rams have a formula right now. It's don't turn the ball over, try to lean on the run game, get some points when you can, and lean on what I think probably is the best defense in the league right now. They're certainly playing like it. So they're not looking to get into a shootout. They're familiar with this team. The quarterback situation, we obviously don't know. If Goff plays, I think you could in large field tournaments look to the stack a little more. If Walford plays, it's not to say that he can't get there, but he's going to get there. He's going to need rushing yards. I don't see him throwing the ball wildly with terms of volume and whatnot. It's hard to stack him up. And then you've mentioned Akers. I'm not going to have much from this game either. It's the obvious one that I think we would all agree. If there's one game that really goes under a total, if it's 13-10, this is clearly the most likely game to do that just because of the way the Rams are structured right now.
What about you, Alex?
I kind of, I feel like first, when you're thinking about this game, you gotta the quarterback's gonna make a huge difference. So the fact that we don't know right now makes this one really tricky. But most of the speculation I've seen has been that Goff's gonna play. That he's been throwing in practice. Now, that's not a fact. This is just a rumor at this point. And I don't think we'll know until an hour and a half before the game, probably. There's also a chance that Goff just isn't returned to full strength and he doesn't perform at a high level. But if we assume that Goff plays, I think Woods and Kupp have been really high upside receivers this year. I don't expect them to be popular at the price. It is a little bit harder to get them in, especially in a tough matchup. Or I guess Seattle, the start of the season, they were pretty weak in defense, but recently they've turned it up a little bit. But I think those two guys are a lot more intriguing with Goff at quarterback for sure. And then I'm kind of looking at the tight ends here just because I feel like Mark Andrews is clearly the number one, but after that, it gets really murky. So Higbee and Everett, although not very exciting fantasy options, definitely are ones that I'm considering in the mix, and ownership at tight end is going to be huge, a huge factor this week. Those two guys are a little bit lower owned than some alternatives like Dawson Knox.
Yeah, and by the way, guys, we have a 3-hour show tomorrow for Sunday. And if you're playing some of these main full slates, right? If you're playing, not the main slate, sorry, if you're playing the Saturday through Sunday slate, then what I would recommend doing is, what are you talking about, Pat? You got me all confused. If you're doing something, if you're playing the Saturday through Sunday, check out yesterday's show or Thursday's show as well as a complimentary piece. We have timestamps in there so you know when we go to Sunday, and it's on the left side. Just trying to help you guys out if you're looking to get both sets of games in. Okay, so back to you for a second, Ben. I would imagine we don't have any. I can't imagine we have any. We do. You know what? We do. I didn't think we would have receiving props on these Rams players, but we do on a lot of different books.
Yeah, and that's something we've talked about this a lot. You can look with props. It's not just in the NBA. Even in football, you can take advantage of news like this. Certainly, it is tricky, though, with Goff because he just might not be effective. But if he's in, I do think the volume, if nothing else, will be much better for guys like Woods, guys like Kupp, and for these tight ends. So that's kind of where I am. You've got Akers on the ground. The tougher part is just the way that Seattle is constructed. I mean, it's been like this all year. There's no mid-range. You're either paying up for one of the big-time receivers or you're punting completely, especially if you're not talking about Carson and you're just talking about the pass catchers.
All right. So, Alex, would you say if Goff plays, any of these Rams or pass catchers are top options on this slate for you?
Not top options as far as like best plays, but definitely options as far as a guy that could be a difference maker, because I feel like everyone's going to target the Bills receivers and Tampa Bay as the best ones, as well as Seattle. I feel like the Rams are going to get lost in the shuffle a little bit. Although now that I'm looking at it, I see that on the draft screen, it's kind of listing Seattle as the weakest pass defense today. So that could up their ownership. So maybe just guys that are in the mix. A lot of it's going to be line of construction, like who's your quarterback. That's going to dictate a lot of the receivers. I do want to mention, I just saw the retweet from News God. Cole Beasley is active for the Bills game today.
Yep. Gonna try to give it a go. That's always a good sign. I don't know. Gonna try to give it a go with a knee. My guess is in the postseason, he's going to be, at least he's going to do everything he can to be halfway fine. And well, if you're rostering him, just understand that maybe he's not at 100%, but neither are a lot of players on this slate. Ben, on the Seattle side of the ball, actually, how could I forget my favorite man, Cam Akers? His ownership is going to be up there. As a matter of fact, it's around 38%. It's probably 7-8% lower than Chris Carson, but he's also $800 cheaper. We'll get to Carson in a minute. But as it relates to Cam Akers, he did not look good last week. He was limited on the ground. He had a ton of carries, 21 for 34 yards, just awful efficiency. But he did have a 52 yards receiving on a 31 was a 38-yard reception. Like, he did a couple good things through the air. And with Darrell Henderson out, I don't even know if it would have mattered. Cam Akers coming off another week, hopefully getting healthier. I don't see any reason why he isn't the clear feature back once again. We've seen that now for 4 straight weeks in LA.
No doubt. And the one thing I think that's the positive from last week is I know it's not a lot, but he had 4 targets and 4 receptions. Those are both highs for the entire season. So if it is Walford again, I don't think it's unreasonable to think some extra checkdowns that can bolster it. Now, he had a bad ankle and he still got 20 carries. It seems like he's going to be in better health here. He's going to be busy. So at 5,100, when you're talking about that type of volume, gotta like Akers, even though it's not an explosive game, he's definitely going to be a key piece of a lot of people's lineups.
Tyler Sappington and D Owens 89. Thank you guys for the super chats. He says Cup, Washington football team, or Beasley and Rams. Just go with the better receiver. I don't know. Do you guys have an opinion here?
I'd go with the first pair.
Yeah,
the Cup
better
side.
Receiver. Although Beasley's good, it's just I don't know the volume he's going to get with not playing at 100% and John Brown. But I don't know. But what do you say, Alex? Cup, Washington, Beasley, Rams.
Well, this one, he says he has the Brady stack, so I would be a little bit worried about playing the football team defense. So that
that makes sense.
Yeah. So obviously that's a big factor. Like, you don't want to play the defense versus your quarterback.
Yeah. All right. Well, I guess it's Beasley Rams. What about Akers for you, Alex?
I think he's a guy that the projections might undervalue a little bit, just because Tampa Bay's rush defense is tough, and man, I'm getting way ahead of myself. I was thinking the next game already. All right, so I feel like he's a really high volume running back that's not getting a lot of targets, and we've seen with guys like Derrick Henry that these guys have a ton of variance. It's basically like how far ahead is their team and how many times they get in the end zone. The Rams are only projected for 19 points, so it's not going to hit a lot. But when Cam Akers has a big game, he could go for 30 easily, and he's 5K, so definitely a good option today.
Okay. I'll stick with you, Alex. Flip it to the other side of this game and look at Chris Carson first. Then we can get into pass catching options. Big time ownership here. 3rd highest ownership on the slate. Remember, you go to awesemo.com, check that out. Use that promo code 2021, by the way. 2021 gets you everything on the site for 3 full weeks for $20. 21 days for $20 using the promo code 2021. There's no reason not to check that out. Go to awesemo.com/promos. You get the ownership, you get the top stacks, you get the player projections, the lineup builder, all of the excellent premium articles, the boom bust tool, all of the data central, the projected stats, anything you need to win it, everything you need to win at DFS, you've got for the 3 weeks, only $20. Normally that's like a $90 value. So huge discount. Yeah. No, tomorrow is the last day, the 10th of January. So be sure to get in on that and use the promo code HAPPY as well. HAPPY gets you 20% off an entire year Plus, you can add Fantasy Cruncher to that. Look, all the tools built by Alex himself. You know him as Awesemo. You've seen him up top of the leaderboards. He uses these tools. We don't just throw his name on them. They make people better players, and hopefully they would do the same for you. If you have any questions, feel free to DM me on Twitter at Lofty_D. I'll help you get set up. Just make sure they're somewhat coherent. And be sure to join Slack chat as well. We do office hours with the pros answering questions all of the time, helping you out and helping guide you along the way. Got some good Sherpas in there as well. So 2021, get you 21 days for $20. Happy, gets you everything for the year, 20% off. And you can add Fantasy Cruncher to that. So check that out. Go to awesemo.com/promos. All right, where was I? The Rams, Alex, and Chris Carson. I'm sorry, the Seahawks and Chris Carson.
Yeah, I think Chris Carson is a solid option. Not anything that's really jumping out a ton, but this year he has been targeted a little bit more than we've been accustomed to in previous ones. So that adds a couple of points. And then Carlos Hyde, although he's active and he missed last week, in weeks 16 and 17, he really didn't see much action. So I think that Carson, we got to feel confident with him getting a solid workload. The matchup's not great, but the Seahawks are favored in this game. So I think he's a good play, but not anyone I'm going to be rushing in to get in my lineups.
What about you for Carson, Ben?
Yeah, I'm pretty much in line with that. Obviously, when we only have 3 games to talk about, you don't have the luxury of saying like, oh, I like another 6K back. There just aren't that many guys to choose from. He's going to have double-digit carries. Technically, they are the favorite. I think it's going to be a pretty competitive game like most. So he does fit the role. I think most people would want to take the savings to Akers. I would as well. And that's probably the way to attack the Rams. They're a great defense all around, but their secondary is the strength to me. It's much harder to throw on the outside than run up the middle. So I think they'll give him opportunities. I don't think he'll be mega effective, but he's fine at that price. He certainly will find his way into some of my lineups.
Do you like the passing attack, DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett, Russell Wilson? I don't think there's any denying they've been quiet lately.
Oh, they definitely have. I mean, you mentioned at the top when we were talking about this game, the pendulum swing for this team. They're still very explosive. It's been frustrating. I, like most, feel like I've never gotten Lockett versus Metcalf right. It doesn't matter what I do. Metcalf has gone up against Ramsey several times, middling success at best. 6 for 59 in the last one, even quieter in the first one, 2 catches for 28 yards. So I do think more people will probably go to Lockett. And then you've got Wilson. I do want to quickly shift and I'll pass it back to you, Laffy. I like Russell Wilson's rushing prop going to Odd Chopper in playoff games and things of this nature. He will take it upon himself to be a little more aggressive on the ground. It's only 23.5 at -115. I wouldn't be stunned to see him pull it down 6-7 times in this game. If he does that, he will soar over this prop.
I like it. What'd you say it is? What's the best prop that we can get over there?
So you got 23.5 yards at -115. There are sites 24.5 at straight even plus 100. So either of those, depending on your risk tolerance, I think he clears those hurdles.
I like it. Okay. And yeah, you can check at Odd Shopper to see from all different books, whether it's DraftKings, PointBet, Sugar House, MGM, William Hill, all of that good stuff. Be sure to make sure we can set a watch list. You can track your bets. But yeah, more importantly, it's totally free. My favorite part though, seriously, is when you can type in a player's name and pull up their props, or instead of having to go to each game to look at these props for each team, you can just pull up receiving yards and just get a list of all of them from a handful or however many different books you have in your state. Alex, what do you think of the passing game for Seattle?
Yeah, I mean, my fiance has a ton of DK Metcalf, and I'm telling her you got to late swap off him. But I mean, like, it's hard to really find any holes in the Seahawks passing game. I mean, like, there's really 2 guys. You got Lockett and Metcalf. That does make it a little bit harder to get unique with the stack, especially now that Greg Olsen is back for today's game. He really muddies up the tight ends where it's hard to feel confident in him, Disley, or Hollister, just because none of them are clearly going to be running the most routes. So this is all kind of leading me down the path to like think that the Lockett and Metcalf are good plays, but stacking them is going to be very tough to pull off effectively because there just aren't very many ways to stack the Seahawks today.
Okay. Mike Evans will play. So that ugly injury, hyperextending his knee in the end zone, ain't going to hold him back. It's good to see. All right. Well, I guess it's time we can turn to that game. Manny C, by the way, appreciate that super chat. Says best option 6,200 and below on FanDuel.
The Akers for me.
Did he say a position or are we just talking flex? I guess just talking flex.
I just went flex. Yeah. I mean,
he said below 6,200 and below. And you have Akers, Ben, you said?
Yeah, he's at 61. I think he's a pretty solid play.
I like it. I like Hilton too. I just think as good as this Buffalo pass defense is, it's going to be tough to slow them, or they're going to have to throw a lot. And I think Nyheim Hines is also pretty viable. But yeah, Cam Akers based on volume alone makes for a really good play. Alex, 6,200 or lower on FanDuel. Anyone that you would say is your top option?
I like the Akers call. It does look like, man, like all the guys that I want are over 6,200. So that's a tricky one. Maybe. I mean, Gibson is someone that I feel like could go under owned today because the Tampa Bay rush defense is very strong, but I don't know if that really moves the needle enough to hurt Gibson's chances. And I feel like he's going to be one of the lower owned lead backs today. So I'm going to be taking some shots on Gibson.
All right. Greg Ehrenberg, Kyle Dvorchak coming up next. They'll take your questions. They'll wind it down the clock for 1 hour, getting us up to lock. Actually, 1 hour and 5 minutes. You got an extra 5-minute tail to that show. So be sure to stick around. You guys ready to talk about the third and final game here?
Yep.
All right. Let's do it. Hit that thumbs up, by the way, and subscribe. God, I must be annoying, right? But the more you do it, then we won't have to ask. That's not true. We're just going to get greedy. But it is appreciated. And I know I know it can be like, oh, he's asking for him again. I get it. But the algorithm at YouTube, the only way to feed it is with subs and comments on the show and likes and stuff like that. Blame YouTube, not me. All right, guys, let's talk Tampa Bay and Washington. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers, 8.5-point favorites at Washington. Yes, they are a home team, a 7-win home team in the postseason. We got to change that division-winning nonsense. 45-point total, Ben. We don't know if Alex Smith is going to start. And from what I've seen, now, I think we have to be careful because sometimes Ian Rappaport says things that aren't true. Seldom, right? But we've seen it happen a couple times this season. And I think it was him that said something like, Walford and Heineke starting this week, ? And then it just throws everybody into a tailspin. I don't know what to do, but it's possible that Alex Smith does not play, and that could get even uglier for Washington, whose implied total is already at 18.25.
I mean, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that it would be no deal or a boost, but I will say Alex Smith has not been playing. He's been hurt. He's been banged up, and it hasn't been a prolific passing attack. So Taylor Heineke, we'll see. I don't think it's a death sentence if he's forced to play. If anything else, it may make him obviously a little more dynamic. Smith can't move right now. They can get him mobile. We saw that with the Rams getting creative. So just keep that in mind. What I think it would do, though, is really hurt, obviously, the skill position players. Smith likes to check down, rack up the catches. McKissick is at the top of that list. I don't know what we would get if Heineke is thrown in there in that regard.
JJT says, if you want more subscribers and likes, start doing toy reviews on here. Yeah, you're right. Or we'll just start doing ASMR, where you take something and go up against the mic like this and then pretend that you're some type of shaman. It's the silliest stuff ever, man. Or you can, have you not seen that, Ben? The
I don't
ASMR?
even know. I have. You've said
Millions
multiple words that I don't know what they mean.
Millions and millions upon millions of views on this stuff. I swear, they'll take a water bottle and they'll start going like this up against the mic, and people love it. They get.
I think I know what you're talking about. The sound thing.
Yeah.
Or
Or
that's
just
terrifying. No.
Or just react to someone else's video that they put a lot of time and effort and skill into and react and make goofy faces to it. You'll get a million polls there too. So I don't know. I think I'd like to believe we're providing some type of service. Alex, what are your thoughts on the Washington situation right now? Like, it is a late game. And I mean, how are you playing this in terms of, are there any contingency plans you have? Are you not worried about that? Does it influence what you do with a Gibson or a McLaurin or a Sims? You know what I mean?
Well, yeah, I feel like it would be horrible for any Washington players if Heineke gets a start here. I mean, this guy didn't even start on the St. Louis Battlehawks. I don't think he's got like much promise based on anything I'm seeing here. I mean, so I'm just kind of seeing this as maybe a smokescreen because Alex Smith played every snap last week. Usually if guys are pulled from the game due to injury, that makes them a lot less likely to play the following week, but that wasn't the case. So I'm just kind of keeping my fingers crossed and playing a little bit of Alex Smith and the football team players. Of course, if Smith is ruled out or not starting, we can late swap pretty easy from there. So that's how I'm doing it.
Okay. Well, since I already kicked it off with the Washington side and the unknown with Alex Smith, let's talk about Washington a little bit further, Ben. Last week we had Antonio Gibson and McLaurin questionable coming into that must-win game against the Eagles. Just, a fantastic overall football game. I'm sure that one will be on NFL Network for years to come. But Gibson and McLaurin, maybe they were at 100%. It's just hard to believe with the turf toe, and then McLaurin and what should have been a multi-week injury got himself out there. Does that play into your decision-making at all today? Or are you saying, look, they got another week, they're good to go. I don't really care about that at all.
I mean, I definitely care. It's a cumulative effect. There's just a lot of things that I have some concern about. And if any of them come to fruition, whether it's the quarterback situation, the fact that they're banged up, the fact that Tampa, certainly against the run, is very strong, it's tough. But at the same time, this is only 3 games. We have to do something. And McLaurin is going to be thrown out there regardless of who's throwing him the ball. They're going to be throwing him the ball. Devin White is missing from Tampa's defense. I do think that's a bigger deal than most. He's a good player. Gibson is tougher for me just because obviously you don't want to run straight through Tampa's front. He could see 15, 20 touches. I just don't know how effective they'll be.
Right. What about J.D. McKissic?
Yeah, I mean, I think he's in line to rack up, in full point PPR, we've seen this time and time again, he can get 10, 12 targets, may not accumulate a ton of yards, but the reception should be there. I think Alex Smith playing helps McKissic. Heineke's more of a wild card. I think he could run the ball more and do some different things. I'm not sure it's the greatest thing for McKissic.
Alex, how about you here? Just overall opinion right now. Let's say, I know you touched on it a little bit, but let's hammer this down because, as Ben said, it's only a 3-game slate. We don't exactly have the luxury of saying, just throw this one out the window. If Alex Smith doesn't play, because it really does not look like he's going to right now, do you have any options here that you really like or that you're at least willing to consider, whether it be McKissic, whether it be McLaurin, Gibson, Cam, Sims? Again, I know you touched on a little bit, but just to make sure we get all of this nailed down before we talk about the Bucs.
Yeah, I mean, I think that McKissic would take a big hit to his production with the quarterback change because, as Ben said, I think Heineke is a lot more mobile, and that would lead to less checkdowns, which is how McKissic scores a lot of points. But, I mean, they're going to be trailing the game probably if Heineke's in, so that would be a good thing for McKissic's snap count. I do feel confident in Terry McLaurin, though. He's been a guy that's succeeded pretty much, whether it was Alex Smith, Kyle Allen, or Dwayne Haskins. Last week, he played on all but one of the passing plays for the football team, which made me feel confident that he's mostly returned from the injury. They spelled him only on rushing plays pretty much. So I feel like he might be a guy that, just given the uncertainty at quarterback and the fact that he has a questionable tag, could go a little bit overlooked today.
Ben, you know what I realized right now
What?
that I hadn't realized before? You've been adding some stuff to your wall, haven't you?
Little by little, got a Hartford Whalers pennant that I found the other day, which is just a sweet thing because I love the Hartford Whalers.
That is
And a
sweet.
couple other things. Slowly but surely, we're adding to the wall.
What are those junior mints?
Yeah, that's Junior Mints, Black and White Cookies, Seinfeld references in there.
Oh, okay.
So
Good
we got some
stuff.
things going on behind me.
So each week we're going to see a little more, and then it's just going to be overwhelmed with gnarly shit.
And then when you
behind
see less and less, then you know I'm selling things off to keep playing because times are tough because I can't get these stacks right. But win some.
Well, hopefully we can get Tampa Bay right. That's going to be one of the more difficult ones. This is, I love to use your mantra on this, Ben. We not only have to get it right that the Tampa Bay Bucs are going to score a lot of points, which, if we're being honest, at least Vegas tells us that they probably should. You have a 27-point implied total. But then we have to get right if it's going to be Evans, who's active now. It's almost unfortunate. I'm happy for the guy that he's finally getting a playoff start, but it would have been, process of elimination would have made things a little bit easier. You got Gronk, who's been a lot better. He's cheap. His ownership isn't even that crazy. He's been a downfield threat. And then Godwin, who's been relegated to like a wide receiver 3 role, but he's still a stud. And then Antonio Brown, who's been seeing more snaps and getting more opportunities lately. These are not just like one good one and then a few guys that once in a while get mixed in. Maybe if we were talking about some of the other options before these guys came to town, sure. But this is really tough to figure out where the football is going to go, even if they are scoring points. You kind of have to hope for an onslaught.
Not only do you have to hope for an onslaught, in recent weeks, the Tampa onslaught has been effective. And I do think that's something to keep in mind. One of them, particularly the Detroit game, that was a small slate. And coming out of that first game, it was literally you wanted 5 Tampa guys. I do think that plays in a little. People are going to look to really spread in this game. And I get it. Obviously, for Washington to have any chance, and we'll get to the betting side before we duck out of here. But Brady's going to have to get rid of the ball quickly. He's going to have options to do that. I don't think you want to go nuts on the onslaught. I don't see that happening, but certainly mixing and matching, it's hard to really prioritize. I always say I like Godwin the best, but I think today that's probably closer to unanimous than most, given that Mike Evans is somewhat hobbled.
Yeah, Mike Evans hobbled, and ownership coming in on this team, Tampa Bay Bucs, Alex, is Ronald. Well, we'll get to Jones in a second, but then it's like Godwin around 24, Gronk around 20, Evans around 13%, Antonio Brown around 13%. So they're not uber chalk by any sense. And I think that's probably because of what we were just talking about. It's so hard to figure out who it's going to be. What are you doing with Tampa?
Yeah, I think Antonio Brown is kind of where I'm starting off this week, which has been a big departure from previous weeks, because the problem with Antonio Brown was his snap count, and it was around the 60-ish percent mark for a few weeks. But then last week, when Mike Evans was pulled from the game, that went up to like 90%. So if Evans is at all limited, I think we'll see more Antonio Brown today, which would be a huge factor because he's been targeted on 25% of his routes compared to 18% for Evans and Godwin. So if he is on the field more, I feel like he's their number one receiver, even though, I mean, I feel like Godwin's had the best year as far as efficiency. So I'd be kind of starting off with AB, and then, Chris Godwin would be the other guy to feel confident in. Mike Evans is anyone's guess. The ownership's going to be low because of the injury, but I feel like there's a decent chance that he's not 100%.
We have a giveaway on Twitter, and it's pretty much the easiest one to at least get it right and put yourself in for the random drawing. Guess who's going to have more passing yards, Alex Smith or Tom Brady? That's a tough one, especially if Alex Smith doesn't play or even if he plays. You go to awesemo_com, check that out, follow the directions. It's very simple. We're giving away an entire year of Awesemo Plus NFL content. So next year when we start back up, you've got the full season for free. We'll pick a random winner of whoever out of whoever gets that right. And while you're at it, follow Ben at JazzRaz DFS. It's double-Z. So RAZ. But there's two Z's in Jazz. Just trying to help you out here, man. I'm sure there's a lot of people that say I can't find them and they just give up.
Oh,
Yeah, they just give up.
They give up. You gotta want it. 2021, you can't give up so easily.
And Alex at Awesemo DFS, myself at Lofty_D, LOUGHY_D. All right, so Alex, what about Ronald Jones here? He's getting some ownership. He's in a good spot. I was kind of disappointed last week that Bruce Arians said they wanted to get him a ton of work, and then he saw the ball 12 times, but he scored. He salvaged a little bit. He's cheap, but everyone's cheap on DraftKings. Do you like him against the Washington today?
Yeah, I think Ronald Jones is one of my favorite plays today. So he had that finger injury, and as soon as I saw like what was happening to start the game, I got really nervous because Leonard Fournette was in the start. But all in all, Ronald Jones had his snap counts pretty high. He ran routes on 43% of passing plays compared to 39% for Fournette in week 17, which was encouraging because I was like, this finger injury could prevent him from receiving the ball as effectively. He didn't get targeted, but he was out there. So that makes me feel encouraged about his receiving today. And then he got 71% of the rushing attempts. As you said, this only totaled to 12 looks, but as far as the percentage, that was pretty good. So Tampa Bay being a huge favorite here, like that bodes well for them having a lot of rushing attempts. And Ronald Jones seems clearly the number one guy that they're counting on today, most likely to be their lead running back.
All right. And Ben, Ronald Jones?
Yeah, I think I'm in line with what Alex said there. They should be leading their favorite. He's got opportunities. He's explosive. We've seen some big runs from him. Just can't fumble, but you can't really worry about that. If that happens, that happens. I want to say real quick, the spread is moving. It's up to 9.5. I'm not going to say that's because Alex Smith probably sits, but it's probably because Alex Smith sits. If you like the Washington side, I would recommend waiting. I do, and I'm going to wait because I hope it crosses 10. I don't think Henneke being in there is that big of a deal. I will wait and hopefully get a better number. So just keep that in mind on the betting side of things.
What are you willing to grab it at? Just let it cross 10 and you're happy?
Yeah. I mean, I will take it now if I have to, but there's no reason. I don't see it's not going to ever go near 7. So you don't really have to worry about a key number. It could go over 10 if Smith is ruled out. The reason you're back in Washington has nothing to do with the quarterback. It has to be because you think that they can get to Brady and really cause problems.
I wanted to ask you one real quickly about this Mike Evans receiving yard prop, because a couple of books actually have it up still and had it up before he was even confirmed in or out. 58.5 yards. The under is only minus 115, which I don't know. I guess it's a matter of whether, and that's at William Hill. I guess it's a matter of whether you think he's actually healthy enough to not be a decoy when they have so many other weapons.
Yeah, and I also think just in theory, Brady's going to be getting the ball out as fast as possible. And to me, that's Antonio Brown and that's Godwin. Evans is more over the top in red zone. So take that for what it's worth. It's going to be an interesting game. I said last week, I think Washington can beat them. I still feel that way, regardless of who's at quarterback for Washington.
All right, coming up next, Greg Ehrenberg, Kyle Dvorchak taking you all the way up to lock. We've got about a minute to go here. Alex, final thoughts? Any final DFS thoughts? Any final betting thoughts that you could check out at OddsShopper before we go?
Yeah, I think that this week is the first. I feel like playoffs always have increased betting volume. So as far as sports betting, you got to kind of fade the popular bets. So those would in general be overs, and you can go to OddsShopper and see where all the money is coming in. Of course, the more money coming in, that's going to move the line in certain directions. So that's definitely a factor that you can look at. As far as the slate, I think it should be a really good one. With 3 games, the strategy is so much different from a 10 to 12 game main slate. So one of the things that I think I might be fading more today is the run back. In a large slate, you're really hoping for two teams to kind of be in this shootout where they keep trading touchdowns, where the leading team is playing defense more and the trailing team is playing offense more, leading to more passing and more plays in the game. The fact is, in the NFL, shootouts don't happen that often. So if most people are going to be kind of building game stacks, it's kind of naturally, I kind of do like going to that onslaught that we've seen work where you pick like maybe like the defense and a stack and the running back. I feel like that has a pretty decent probability of working, and it's a lot of different than how people approach main slates. So maybe people won't do that at a great enough frequency.
All right, Ben, very quickly, because we're already past our time. William gave us a $5 super chat. He says, are you guys changing exposures on defenses or just letting the optimizer run? I know you're a hand builder, but essentially when it comes to defenses, just a quick approach that you do.
Yeah, I don't really care. What you're looking for is opportunities. The main thing is don't, as Alex talked about, you don't want to go crazy and have a full-on stack against your defense. That's a little too aggressive.
All right, good luck, guys. Ron Burgundy coming in hot as we head out with a $50 super chat. Says, I'm trying to get out of here. I can't get out of here. He says, thank you guys for taking time out of your day to come here and do these shows. I always appreciate it. Well, appreciate you coming and value the input you give. So my question is to all of you, what 2 running backs do you think will be a lock? All right, just really quickly, give one, Ben. You give one, Alex. Ben, go ahead.
Obviously, no locks in this games, but Cam Akers is where I would go.
All right, Alex, one word. Who is it?
Ronald Jones.
There we go. Thanks, guys. We'll see you back here soon. Live Before Lock coming up next.
Good stuff, guys.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Jordan. Later, guys.
The mic's hot. Quick question. So there's a couple super chats. Did they answer them before, or do they still need to be hit? The 2 that are showing in YouTube chat right now. Yeah. You said did or didn't? Okay, cool. Cal.
Hey. All right.
Yep. It's the Awesemo NFL Live Before Lock show. Jordan with an enthusiastic countdown. The folks at home couldn't see it, but Jordan was just really putting those fingers up. He was all excited. He's fired up for the playoffs. I am too. And you know who else is probably excited for the playoffs? Kyle Dvorchak. Because Kyle, I'm going to need to lean on you with some of these injury news. We're going to have to come to a consensus on what to do with some of these wide receiver situations. A little bit of a weird week here. How do you feel about the first 3 game slate of the playoffs?
I kind of like it because on almost any NFL slate, you're not really getting much of like an information edge. Everyone knows everything, and it's about like game theory and projection. And that's not good, but like anytime we can get a small edge where people didn't think Cole Beasley was going to play up until like at least Friday, like that's kind of an edge that I think is worth at least exploiting a little bit. So situations like that where people don't late swap. So if you came into this morning setting your lineup, you were probably not playing Mike Evans because you weren't sure if he was going to play. By the time, it locks and people are not checking their lineups, at least not changing their lineups anymore, we will have more information. And you and me, being the sharp guys that we are hopefully at least trying to act on some of that. So I kind of like specifically this lake. There's a lot of, like you said, a lot of dynamics we still have even yet to find out.
Yeah, and just hitting on some of the news because we mentioned a little bit at the top there. So we have Mike Evans expected to play tonight. Cole Beasley is officially active. As to what the roles are going to be, that's still a little bit up in the air. We'll definitely talk about it a little bit more when we get to the wide receiver position, and we'll talk about some of the game theory involved there. As of right now, neither Mike Evans nor Cole Beasley projected for all that much ownership. Guys, as we start to talk about these games here, don't forget, like the YouTube channel, like the video, subscribe to the podcast network, subscribe to the YouTube channel as well. Subscribe to everything we do because you want to find out when Kyle and I are about to go live and not able to talk about the things we're about to talk about because for some reason my tongue isn't working right now, but also something that happens.
I just request that people like the channel though, not like any action, and just be like, hey, if you could, like in your heart, like it.
Yeah, just like us, because that's
like
really that's all I want. I just want attention. We've got 2,500 people watching right now. That's good attention for us. That means you probably like the channel, but you should also like the show as we do it as well. Let's start with the quarterback position because we do have a huge amount of ownership here to talk about. Kyle Allen. I'm all over the place right now. Josh Allen, not Kyle Allen. That would be, he could have been starting this week, but obviously not the case, although we don't totally know who's starting for Washington either right now. But Josh Allen projected for nearly 50% ownership. So the question here becomes then, that number, do you think it's fitting? Is it too high? Is it too low? Because he's obviously by far the best quarterback option on the slate. If you're playing cash games, you definitely want to go to Josh Allen. But for GPPs, the question becomes not do you or do you not want to play Josh Allen? It's how much Josh Allen do you want to play?
Yeah, so yeah, it's exactly. It's like, I mean, you could fade him. Like I have done that and gotten punched in the teeth on a lot of slates where there's one super chalk quarterback. And I'm like, well, one of the easiest ways is if they go out and fail to get to the top, you just play other quarterbacks. I mean, barring like a horrible catastrophic failure or an injury, it seems like we're clearly going to get Josh Allen being the best quarterback. As of yesterday, I'll update it. I'll update my words soon. But the top stacks tool even had him as an advantage despite being north of 40%. It was like we see this with Patrick Mahomes sometimes on slates where there's kind of spread out ownership. 12, 13, 14% Patrick Mahomes is the most popular quarterback. And our top stack tool still says like he just has such a vast chance of outscoring his competition that you're fine eating the ownership. And I think in the context of this slate, that's kind of the same case. Like who is going to be outscoring Josh Allen this week? And it's not like his price is terrible. He's not 9,000 or something. You can afford to get to him and still play most of the other good plays. So for me, like too much ownership on Josh Allen is like 80, 90%, anything below that. And you'll find me somewhere in there in that 60+% range at least. So I think he is easily the best play. And with plays like Cole Beasley and Mike Evans, I think those are the kind of the two for players looking to gain an edge. Those are the two easiest ones. You can play a Stephon Diggs and Josh Allen stack. If you're double stacking with Cole Beasley, you're not going to be the most like duplicated lineup. You're going to have a bit of leverage there just because we don't expect a lot of people to be on Beasley. So there are ways to obviously like the salary isn't that much of a restriction on this slate. And you can still get unique with Josh Allen because he meets both those criteria. I'm finding the chalk on him.
Yeah, and then I think you make a good point there because we've got Cole Beasley projected for about 10% ownership on both FanDuel and DraftKings. This is kind of a nice slate to talk about when we're hitting on both sites at the same time because the pricing is pretty similar on both sites. The ownership is pretty similar on both sites too. So I think we're making a lot of similar decisions across FanDuel and DraftKings. And then referencing the top stack tool. So we have Josh Allen projected for 43% ownership about on both sites. But the chance of the Buffalo Bills, Josh Allen, and at least one of his wide receivers being the top stack on the slate is over 50% of the time. So even with this high ownership, it's not quite enough for him. I think that you're spot on there. And then we talk about some of the other quarterbacks if you wanted to pivot to, Russell Wilson or Tom Brady. Well, both of them are definitely viable plays for this slate. I think both of them are going over-owned, and it's because Josh Allen's going a little bit under-owned. So these guys were both picking up close to 20% ownership, but they're closer to 15% chance of being the top stack on the slate. So to me, Josh Allen, I mean, ownership aside, I just don't really care. I think that he is the guy to roster the most on the slate. He's by far my highest owned quarterback.
Yeah, I think I'm looking at the top stack tool. We have Josh Allen, as I said, and one other quarterback as players who we think are more likely to be the top stacker teams, I guess, that are more likely to be the top stack than their ownership would say. And the other one is Washington. It's simply that, like I said before, the ownership on Josh Allen is high. It is not high enough. Like Seattle, really? Do we think with Seattle potentially facing a backup quarterback that's not going to put up points on them and their defense getting better down the stretch, are they going to throw the ball more than 30 times? I don't know. It seems not awfully likely. The Rams are literally going to be either playing a banged up Jared Goff, who wasn't that good in the first place, or John Wolford. I don't know. There's not a ton of other great spots to really go to. Tom Brady, I think, would be the next one. And we have his ownership as efficient, his stack ownership, the Tampa Bay stack ownership as efficient. So I'll have some of that, but I don't think you gain a ton of edge by, getting over the field on that. Whereas for me, like Buffalo, playing 2/3 or 80% of your lineups as that, you're probably, the math on our top stack shows that you're just better off covering more of the unique Buffalo bases than you are trying to get weird playing a John Wolford stack or whatever.
So talking about the next tier of quarterbacks, then we've got Russell Wilson and Tom Brady. Being honest, I'm underweight to the field on both of them, and that's just going to be the case kind of because just the nature of how much exposure I have to Josh Allen for this slate. But I think it's interesting to compare the two, Russell Wilson and Tom Brady, because of the two of them, which do you prefer to stack? I have equal exposure. I went with 10% to both of them. So I'm curious if you have a much different lean than me on Wilson versus Brady.
I have significantly more Brady, but I'm not that much over the field. It's just like you've chosen to split them. I've chosen to mostly push my chips in onto Brady, but I'm the same way as you. It's hard for me to get over the field on anyone who's like 10% owned because I have a ton of Josh Allen. So I have a little bit more interest in Tom Brady. His team total is a little bit higher. The game environment looks, I don't know if I call it better, but I think the run back options are a little more, I don't know about exciting, but I think the run back options are more palatable. When I look at my Tom Brady stacks, I'd rather run whatever stack I'm running back with a Terry McLaurin, Logan Thomas, or JD McKissick than I would with either of the Rams receivers or their mess of tight ends. Like the only run back I feel good with my Seattle stacks is like Cam Akers, but that's not even that great of a positive correlation. So I do think because I think they're about equal, like we have actually, I mean, even the Bucs still have a pretty solid implied team total relative to Seattle. Somehow Seattle as a favorite has a 23 implied team total. That's so boring. We have Tampa Bay with 26.5 is not incredibly far off from Buffalo. So because we project them to score more, and we know that Tampa Bay is one of the pass heaviest teams, even like neutral script, I think they're a little more interesting. The only counter argument I would throw is that it is going to be much more difficult to predict my Tampa Bay stack, who is going to be the non-quarterback part of the stack. There are 4 viable options at least. You have 2 in Seattle. So you cut down the options. You just have to make less Seattle lineups essentially to cover your bases with them. So I get that aspect of it. I like the predictability of the Seattle offense if they do end up passing well better, but I just think their ceiling is so much lower.
Yeah, so it's interesting because I kind of approach this from a little bit different of an angle because at least with Russell Wilson, I know I want to stack him with DK Metcalf. With Tom Brady, I don't know who to pair him with at wide receiver. It is so much more complicated. But then your point is taken also where the run back options for Washington, I feel like are much clearer than the run back options for Russell Wilson. So that was kind of why I split the difference and I just went with even exposure to both of them. But with that said, still 2 quarterbacks that I'm underweight to the field on. And still most of that quarterback exposure to me is going to the chalky Josh Allen, who I still think is going under-owned. Let's talk about the injured quarterbacks now. Jared Goff and Alex Smith. Personally, I expect both of them to play. I have questions about how effective they're going to be. But with that said, I would have questions about how effective they were going to be, even if we didn't have any kind of injury concerns about them. So do you think either of them are actually going to sit out today? I know there's been a lot of talk about Alex Smith seems like to be the more likely of the 2 to sit. But with that said, I mean, he played through the calf injury last week. If he played through it last week, I can't imagine it's worse this week than it was a week ago. It's a playoff game. Alex Smith has had an incredible story coming back from a broken leg where it looked like he was potentially never going to be able to walk again. So I think he's going to end up playing in this game. I don't know how good he's going to be. He's my least favorite quarterback option on the slate. But Alex Smith and Jared Goff, do you think both of them start today?
I guess I would bet no on Alex Smith. I have the Roto World report pulled up. It's from Rappaport, who famously has made some comically bad calls, if you want to call him that. But I mean, I don't know. He's still like, we remember all the times he's wrong. I can tell you every weekend he has 10 tweets in the middle of the night about random players that are almost always right. So like more often than not, he's right. Some of his tweets are terrible, comically bad, and give DFS players an edge. I don't think this would be one of them. I don't think we see Alex Smith because of that. It was just that he's trending in the wrong direction was the wording of it. So I guess I would say he sits. For Goff, I have no strong lean. I have really no clue if he plays. I would be a little interested in Wolford though. Like he is just the mega Konami code quarterback where he ran for over 50 yards in his first start. He averaged over 20 in the AAF per game. And he was like 1,200 yards and 16 touchdowns in his final 2 seasons. And I believe Wake Forest is either Wake Forest or Vanderbilt, one of those 2. So he's like at his price could run one in 50 yards and throw a touchdown and give you an entirely different roster construction. I don't have any of that right now because I don't know what's going to happen, but I'd probably late swap off of some of like my Brady lineups to get to a little bit of Wolford exposure because I think he would be almost unowned.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely true, especially because, I mean, if you just consider that after the first game locks, you know, Josh Allen's going to be picking up 50% of the lineups. Then you just have people in general not wanting to make swaps. I mean, it's very viable on a 3-game slate. One of the quarterbacks ends up being sub 1% owned if we end up getting one of these guys ruled out. we just don't know what that's going to be, if that's going to be the case with these guys in or out right now. I will say this, just based on the information we have now, and if we assume that Alex Smith and Jared Goff both play, of the really low-owned cheap quarterbacks, Phillip Rivers is my favorite option. There's going to be so much ownership going to Buffalo, and I think that the offense for Buffalo, it seems like they should have a big game. They're projected by far to be the highest scoring team on the slate. But I also think that the Colts are going to be a team that could also put up points. I mean, they're right around having the team total as the second highest total on the slate. If we assume that Buffalo is going to be leading for most of the game, the Colts are going to have to throw the ball to keep up. The other thing to consider too with Phillip Rivers in the passing game, that Jonathan Taylor is projecting for a lot of ownership at running back. So I think there's leverage there just by going to Phillip Rivers and then stacking with either Michael Pittman or T.Y. Hilton, something like that. I'm not playing like a massive amount of Phillip Rivers, but I'm a little bit overweight to the field on him. And since I'm really high on Josh Allen, I think it makes sense to be relatively high on Phillip Rivers when he's projected for sub 10% ownership. So Phillip Rivers, is he also your favorite cheap quarterback, or do you prefer Alex Smith or Jared Goff to him?
No, we're in lockstep. I guess maybe if Walford ends up getting the start, technically I would be like more over the field on him because I'd put 3% or 4%. He could be 1%. So maybe like you could argue technically he would be my favorite cheap quarterback. But right now, as it stands, Phillip Rivers, I think is maybe I come in like with the field on Brady, but other than Josh Allen, Phillip Rivers is probably the only quarterback I'm over the field on. And it's for all the reasons you lined out. Like if we're so interested in targeting the Buffalo side of things, we not have to, but we likely assume that this game as a whole looks pretty appealing. And obviously it has a 50-point total. The next closest is 45.5. It's the only one we can reasonably project to be an actual back and forth scoring affair, at least to some extent. I know the Bills are still touchdown favorites, but then you look at the team totals. I have Indy at 21.5. The Seahawks are 22.75. Like that is, they're essentially projected to score the same amount of points, except Seattle could do it by running the football and playing this ugly game where Russell Wilson throws 25 attempts. Phillip Rivers is going to, I mean, if Vegas is even close to being right on this touchdown spread, we can reasonably project Phillip Rivers to drop back as many as like 40 times. So if we project game script to be in favor of one quarterback in terms of like what we want them to be doing, throwing the football, and team totals to be nearly the same within about a point, that's kind of the reason I'm not as excited about Russell Wilson. His touchdown potential, given what we know about like his team total, doesn't look that much greater than someone like Phillip Rivers. And that's also the reason I'm over the field on Phillip Rivers. And I also like the nugget you added on Jonathan Taylor being chalky and this being a way to leverage that. Like, do we really think Jonathan Taylor is going to be able to rack up 25 carries in a game they're touchdown dogs? Like the reason he's had such good games recently, not that he isn't really good, that also kind of matters, but it's because for Pittsburgh, they were leading, I think, for almost the entirety of that game. That had like the final few minutes, Pittsburgh came back and won. And then was it like Jacksonville was the other one where they just killed Jacksonville or whatever? Like this doesn't project to be anything like those games. So I do think both Phillip Rivers as just a value play, like his team total is good. He has some touchdown potential and is cheap. And then as leverage off of Jonathan Taylor, who I won't say I don't get his ownership. I get that running back is terrible on this slate, but it does seem to me like he's one of the running backs I'd probably be most under the field on. I can leverage that with Phillip Rivers exactly like you said.
So I think that it's a good jumping point to move to the running back position now, because talking about Jonathan Taylor, he is the highest priced running back on the slate. On FanDuel, he's picking up over 50% ownership. On DraftKings, he's picking up right around 40% ownership. I'm going to be underweight to the field on Jonathan Taylor, and it's mostly a product of his price going way up, and I'd rather spend up for Stephon Diggs if I'm spending up for somebody on this slate. I think that he makes a little bit more sense. There's not all that much value that I really love on this slate. Another thing, too, is Jonathan Taylor, this isn't the best game script for him. I understand he's been ridiculously good the last couple of weeks, but he's never had more than 5 targets in any game this year. Over the last 2 weeks, he's had 2 targets, 1 target. He did have a game with 5 targets against the Texans, but before that, 2 targets against the Raiders, 3 targets in another game against the Texans. In general, when they are trailing, Nyheim Hines gets a lot of additional playing time, and it sets up a bad game script for Jonathan Taylor. So given all of the ownership that's going towards Buffalo, I don't really think the ownership on Jonathan Taylor is correct when considering his price tag. Now, I'm not saying I'm totally fading Jonathan Taylor. I have him in like 20 to 30% of my lineups, but still it's about half of the exposure the field has on him. So I'm going to be hoping that Jonathan Taylor either doesn't have a good game, or one of the lineups I just happen to have him on is the nut lineup today. But I'm underweight to the field on Jonathan Taylor. Do you feel much differently than me on him?
No, it's I mean, I don't have too much to add, honestly. And I probably have almost the exact same ownership too. And the thing is, I I don't know if I'll say equal, but very similar to equal ownership between Nyheim Hines and Jonathan Taylor, because it's exactly like you said. We know when they're like playing their 2-minute drill, when they're playing from behind, Hines is the guy who is more likely to be out there on the field in these situations. It's not that we think Taylor goes out and carries the ball 5 times, but it's that if he only gets 15 carries and a target or two, at his price there, it's very unlikely. Even if he scores on one of those 15 carries, it's still not incredibly likely that he ends up making the optimal lineup. So again, I'm with you. I didn't cross him out. There are players on this slate that I crossed out. I didn't cross him out. It's just that I think his efficient ownership lies somewhere in the 15 to 25% range. And that's where I'll fall. Whereas Hines in that is the exact same way, where his ceiling certainly is not the same as Jonathan Taylor, but at his price, I think his efficient ownership probably 20 to 25 as well, somewhere in that range, because I can gain leverage on the field by playing as much, if not more, Hines than Taylor, because Hines is going to be less than 20% owned on a slate where running back is terrible. He's cheap. If none of the running backs do particularly well, just jamming in the cheap guys, jamming in Cam Akers, Nyheim Hines, JD McKissic, these guys, if running back just isn't a good position on this slate, which is very possible, I don't want to be paying the most price by $2,000 for a Jonathan Taylor. I'd much rather pivot down if I'm trying to find volume per se. Ronald Jones, Cam Akers, even Chris Carson, who I don't particularly like, all of those guys in their game scripts or based on what their team wants to do could see as much work at $2,000 less, if not more. Some of these guys are almost $3,000 less. So I have very little Taylor, and I even think I might be excessive on how much I like Taylor.
So I don't have more exposure to Nyheim Hines than Jonathan Taylor. However, I'm overweight to the field on Nyheim Hines, and I'm underweight to the field on Jonathan Taylor. That still ends up with me having a little bit more exposure to Taylor. But with that said, I think that Hines, this is a really good game script for him. I mean, we've seen him have really big games in the passing game when they're trailing or in some tight games. Last week against Jacksonville, 7 targets for Nyheim Hines. Against Pittsburgh, 5 targets for Hines. Game against Tennessee earlier in the year, we saw him pick up 10 targets. That was his most of the season. So if this is a spot where the field is going to be very heavy on Buffalo, I think it makes sense in trying to make lineups with Josh Allen that are a little bit different than the field. We talked about Cole Beasley. We talk about him more when we get to the wide receiver position. But Nyheim Hines is also somebody I think makes a whole lot of sense as a run back option, especially in Josh Allen lineups. I think there's more correlation with Nyheim Hines and Josh Allen than there is with Jonathan Taylor and Josh Allen. Does that make sense to you? Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, in the scenario in which Jonathan Taylor plays well, his team almost certainly has to be very close, if not leading. Ideally, you want him to be playing from a 10+ point lead. That either means, which this is the scenario I think seems less likely, that this game just scored 70 points. And even though the Bills ended up losing or coming close to losing, they still put up 30. The more likely scenario is that if Jonathan Taylor is able to rack up 25 carries, something went wrong on the Buffalo side. So I'm not saying they're negatively correlated because there's always just potential that the game shoots out, but I think their correlation is at most very slightly positive, if not probably just neutral. It's probably just a wash. Whereas, Hines, we literally know he is going to come on the field and see 5 to 10 targets in a game where they're down 15. He could see 2 targets in a game where they're winning. So he seems like almost a binary player where when game script favors him, it's very good. And when it doesn't, there's just no chance of him really having a ceiling game. And that same game script that favors him means that Josh Allen probably threw 3 or 4 touchdowns.
So there's a running back in a situation very similar to Nyheim Hines. I'm sure you know who I'm going to talk about, JD McKissic. They're picking up very similar ownership. They're both cheap. I think both of them are going under-owned, frankly, given the game scripts of this game. Washington, 8-point underdogs to Tampa Bay. If Alex Smith plays, we've seen this before. When they get behind in games and Alex Smith is the quarterback, he will throw to JD McKissic a million times. And while that may seem like a big number, 1 million, it's not really that far off because look at some of the recent games for JD McKissic with Alex Smith in their quarterback against the Panthers and Seahawks. 10 targets earlier in the season. You get games where they were trailing against the Lions and the Giants, 14 and 15 targets for JD McKissic. So I look at some of that ownership. This is a weak day for running back, and nobody's rostering JD McKissic in what's really a perfect game script for him. Now, here's the risk, obviously. If Alex Smith is actually not able to play in this game, I don't know what to expect from him with Heineke at quarterback. But if we're going to get Alex Smith at quarterback, throwing the ball to JD McKissic, I think this is a spot where JD McKissic probably gets around 10 targets. At a minimum, it's probably 6 to 8. The target floor would be really high, and the ceiling is literally 15 targets for him. We've seen him get that many when Alex Smith is the quarterback. So I think that when we're comparing these two cheap guys, Nyheim Hines versus JD McKissic, Which one of them do you like more? I have a slight lean towards McKissick, but that's also assuming that Alex Smith is starting quarterback today.
Yeah, I have all the same like positive sentiments about McKissick as you do. He has like 5 double-digit target games just in the second half of the season. And although Heineke would be certainly a downgrade, like we know Smith is probably downright just a better quarterback. That's why he would be starting. And he's more likely to throw to his running backs than essentially any other quarterback in the NFL. I do think probably a lot of McKissick's, some of McKissick's volume is a product of their second, like literally their second receivers are like the second and third receivers in Washington are like borderline practice squad level players. They don't have like a second tight end they can run 2 tight end sets with. And he's on the field a lot. Like just getting on the field in those situations is advantageous. So he's like the second or third target on any given passing play he's on the field for. So yeah, Alex Smith probably helps, but also the situation he's in, regardless of quarterback, is still good. So I think even if we do end up getting Heineke, I still feel good about McKissick. Not as good, but good. My only lean here is that I do think Hines is like a more direct leverage point off of a chalky Jonathan Taylor, whereas we're not going to get a ton of ownership, like in the context of this being a 3-game slate. We're not getting egregious ownership on Antonio Gibson. The split between Gibson and McKissick is not nearly the same as the split between Taylor and Hines, and also the pricing. Like you can reasonably see like Hines doesn't need a ton to pay off versus Taylor needs a ton. There's not that like pricing dichotomy. You know, we have Antonio Gibson at 5,700. He can survive on like an 80-yard and a touchdown type of game. Taylor honestly probably can't. So I like the leverage I get by playing Hines more, but I'm also probably with, if not over the field on McKissick. I'd have to check that. I did check. I actually do have more Hines than Taylor.
Yeah, I mean, that's a little bold to me going with more Hines than Taylor. I would prefer that Hines has the bigger game just based on my ownership relative to the field. But yeah, I mean, I definitely like him as a GPP play more than Taylor when considering some of the ownership there. So I don't mind it. I hope it works out for you because that would probably be in my best interest as well. Let's talk about some of these mid-range running backs. Ronald Jones, Cam Akers, Chris Carson, Antonio Gibson. Of these 4, I'm grouping them together. Which of them do you think makes for the strongest play on the slate?
This is tough. I think Ronald Jones and Cam Akers are probably, in terms of like Chris Carson, maybe technically the best. His team, like we know, they just want to like establish it all of a sudden in the second half of the season, and they're favored, which like you can't point that out to Cam Akers. But I just think at his ownership, like I don't think he's really almost any different than Ronald Jones or almost any different than Cam Akers. He's favored over Cam Akers, so maybe that's the difference. But I do think in terms of ownership, Cam Akers at 30, we have him at 37%, I believe, at 5,100 at his ownership is probably a better play than Chris Carson. And Ronald Jones at essentially the same ownership, having a massively higher implied team total at just a little bit less, and also being favored by many more points than the Seattle Seahawks are favored. I like both of them over Chris Carson. I don't think Chris Carson is a bad play. It's just that anytime I look at this price range, I always feel obligated to go with Ronald Jones, who has a higher implied team total, or Cam Akers, who we know they're really not going to give their backups any run at all. Like I know week 17 doesn't matter a ton. Like Seattle probably knew by halftime essentially that they had not locked up the number 1 seed because Green Bay was kind of beating down on Chicago. So maybe they rested Chris Carson just because it didn't matter a ton. But like we saw Rashad Penny get in some work there, and we've seen in previous weeks Carlos Hyde comes in and gets some work. So I'm not as confident in Chris Carson's market share numbers as I am in Cam Akers, and I'm not as confident in his team total as I am in Ronald Jones. So of them, I guess I'd rank them Ronald Jones because I think he has just the highest ceiling based on his team total, and that's a lot of what matters for a running back, as much as I think like Cam Akers might be the most talented. If his team's an underdog, that's not really good. So I would say I'd rank them Ronald Jones, Cam Akers, and then Chris Carson. If Gibson gets lumped in here, like I have very little interest in Gibson. It's just a massive underdog, low implied team total there, and a running back who is almost certainly going to get more targets than him on his own team. I really struggle to find any interest in Gibson.
Yeah, I'm pretty much on the same page as you. Ronald Jones is an easy number 1 for me. He is the running back I have the most exposure to on this slate. Number 2, I have Chris Carson over Cam Akers in terms of my exposure. And here's the reason why. So Chris Carson, I think, is a little bit less game script dependent. So Chris Carson, whether the Seahawks are up or down in this game, and I think we probably expect them to be up, at least according to the spread, Chris Carson is going to be involved. Whereas Cam Akers, it's not to say that he can't get involved in the pass game. We have seen him get a little bit more work there. But I am a little concerned of what happens in this game if they get down. I don't necessarily think he's going to be out there every snap as he would be in some of the recent weeks where they were ahead, right? I mean, we had a game against the Patriots where they got up by big points and they just ran the ball to Cam Akers almost every play in the second half. He ended up carrying the ball 29 times for 171 yards. But then you look at the follow-up week where they lost to the Jets. Cam Akers only ended up getting 15 carries, 15 targets would be ridiculous. 15 carries, got targeted 3 times, only caught 1 of them. They have Malcolm Brown on the field a lot in passing situations. So the one concern I have with Cam Akers, and I'm still overweight to the field, I have a good amount of exposure. This is just in terms of comparing him to Chris Carson and Ronald Jones, is what happens if they get down? Is there a situation you see where Cam Akers just gets scripted out of the game and they go to a lot of Malcolm Brown?
I don't know. I don't think so. Although it might just be that I think Malcolm Brown is quote not good and Cam Akers is good. Like maybe that is clouding my judgment. But we did see last week in a must-win game, we saw 4 targets for Cam Akers. They're also winning that game though for the most part. So maybe that's not really indicative of what we'd expect from them losing. But he was also an adept pass catcher coming out. Like that was part of his prospect profile, is that he was a good pass catcher. Am I confident that they don't put Malcolm Brown in? Like, no, I definitely can't say I'm confident that Malcolm Brown doesn't come in. That's kind of the role they've used Brown in almost all year. Even McVay talked about this. He said they like using Malcolm Brown as their third down back. He's probably a decent pass blocker and has fine enough hands. So I'm not confident, but I do think there's an upside that he is like a 4 or 5 target guy. Cam Akers is. Even if they're losing, like I think there's that potential, although I am probably less confident that if his team is losing, he gets 5 targets, then Chris Carson will get 5 targets if his team is losing. I agree with you on that.
And then talking about Antonio Gibson, I barely have any exposure to Gibson. I have him at 4% right now, so significantly less than the field. I have a lot more exposure to McKissick. This is a terrible game script for Gibson for a couple of reasons. Number one, the matchup against the Buccaneers is awful. But then number 2, we've seen this generally in Washington games this year. When Washington is up in games, Antonio Gibson plays most of the snaps. When Washington is down in games, J.D. McKissick plays most of the snaps. And Washington is the biggest underdog on today's slate. They're 8-point underdogs. So unless they just really overcome the odds and end up winning, it's hard for me to see Antonio Gibson being a good play, especially when considering how high his ownership is. We have him projected for 32% ownership on FanDuel, 28% ownership on DraftKings. That's too high for me given the game script here and the matchup against Tampa Bay. So I know you also said that you don't really like Antonio Gibson. Did you roster him at all, or was he just a fade for you?
I crossed him out of the player pool. It's all the things you said. And I was like, if I have 3%, like what are the odds that one of the 8-5 whatever lineups I have are actually like the nuts? Whereas like Jonathan Taylor, I do think is a fine play. Like I don't think he's a bad play. His team isn't as big of an underdog. They have a higher implied team total. And we know that he is, I think he's probably even less likely. I kind of agree that McKissick is more likely to take targets than Hines is, because Taylor does have like some pass catching chops as well. I would say, I think in terms of how, I don't want to say how bad they are, in terms of how likely they are to really get just like completely destroyed for like a 10 carry, 25 yard, 1 catch game, Gibson seems far more likely. His team is just worse and they're projected to lose more in a game that is not as exciting in terms of the scoring perspective. So I do think like a level of efficient ownership at 15 to 20% of Taylor makes sense. I think I can actually capture some chance of winning if he goes off while not getting, like losing a ton of equity by him playing poorly. Whereas Gibson, I just think like efficient ownership is so low that why am I even getting there? So I crossed him out.
Yeah, and I mean I have him 4%, so it's not like it's not like this is some big investment I'm making. He just kind of ended up in some lineups, but it's a small percentage. In terms of other running backs, I didn't get to the Bills guys. I didn't play Leonard Fournette. I didn't play Carlos Hyde or any of these other cheap running backs. Is there anybody else who you got any amount of exposure to in a decent way that isn't one of the guys we've talked about?
No, I don't think I have. I could double check. I maybe have a 1 or 2% of Singletary and Moss, which would still put me under the field. I can see if I can find it. But if I did, it wasn't an intentional point I made. It's because they slipped through the cracks and got in my 90th lineup or whatever. I don't really have any, like Buffalo, I think is bottom 5 or 6 in running back rush attempts. So even if you just rule out Josh Allen's rushes, which obviously don't help the running backs at all, their team just doesn't run the football a lot. They run at one of the bottom 5, overall paces in the league. And then they split their carries, at least with like other running backs who play on teams that don't run the football a lot. They might be like a bell cow back. So if you're getting half of like league bottom levels of carries, I just can't find myself getting super interested in. I think the only argument is that just if Buffalo goes out and puts up 40 points, which is certainly possible, it's obviously not the most likely outcome, but if they go out and put up 40 points, there's a decent chance one of these guys finds the end zone. And at their prices, that could end up being enough. So in like super heavy Bills onslaughts, I think throwing them in is like a way to build a unique and not drawing dead lineup. It's not my favorite lineup. I'd rather go with just like two receiver and Dawson Knox before I'd get to a Zach Moss or Devin Singletary, but I wouldn't rule it out. It's fine, especially if it makes your Bills lineups a little different.
All right. And guys, we do have a sponsor for today's show. Today's show is sponsored by No House Advantage. No House Advantage is taking a different spin on daily fantasy sports by offering player prop contests across NBA, MLB, NFL, and PGA for cash prizes. Instead of just playing the traditional way of making DFS lineups with salary, instead you're making lineups based on props. And instead of playing against the house, you're playing against your friends. So it's a peer-to-peer platform. So don't I don't know why I totally just stumbled across my words there. But the best part is you could join for free today. Download the No House Advantage app and check out the daily prop contest without having to deposit a dime. But when you are ready to make your first deposit, No House Advantage will match it for $20 in free play when you use the promo code Awesemo. Refer a friend and you get $5 on their first deposit. Beat your friends, not the house. Win big with player props today. So sponsored by No House Advantage. I would have pulled some of those up, but don't have those right now. Jordan, if you have a chance, just send me a No House Advantage prop. All right, cool.
Greg, are you in a state where you can't play?
Yeah, I can't play, and I just found out the show was sponsored, so I didn't have it up ahead of time. But
I know.
Yeah.
I always have to pull up our projections for it because I can't find them. And but I can tell you right now. We can guess almost certainly our best props will be over interceptions props because they're just like No House just is splitting them at half and they're not juiced. So you're typically getting like if a quarterback is projected for 0.8 interceptions. 0.5, like that obviously doesn't sound like a lot. That's just always a massive advantage. In terms of like the math, we always have that projected as our best bets. So let's throw out Phillip Rivers over 0.5 interceptions. He sounds like a guy you could throw an interception.
Yeah, I mean, especially, so here's the thing also, I'm going to agree with you on Phillip Rivers. Not only is he somebody who's very capable of throwing interceptions, but the other thing to consider too is look at the game script here, right? Where the Bills are almost favored by a touchdown. What has to happen for defenses to generally create turnovers? You need them to get into passing situations. And given that the Bills are such significant favorites in this game, we could very well see Phillip Rivers throw the ball, 35, 40 times in this game. And it's also going to be a spot where they're not going to give up. It's the first week of wild card games. So even if they're down, say like 21 points in the fourth quarter, they're just going to be continually throwing the ball with Phillip Rivers to try to get back into the game. So that's something I'm always looking for with defenses is who has the actual situation where it's favorable for them to potentially get sacks and turnovers. So Bills defense also one that I think makes sense for DFS. And then I also like that over 0.5 interceptions for Phillip Rivers. So I will go with you on that.
Yeah, I think that's something that generally maybe even makes more sense on the slates where teams aren't essentially giving up is that like defense, so much of defense is just like volume essentially. Like we think of like targets, carries, pass attempts as volume. Defense is not only its overall plays run. You want to face teams that are going to be throwing a lot from behind, especially if they have like mediocre quarterbacks. So I do think that's something to look out for on this slate. Like I don't know if the Rams like actually end up passing the football a ton if they have John Wolford under center. They could just run the football a lot and try and play a slow, ugly game. Whereas this game, even though Indy does have a higher implied team total than the Rams, so you think maybe that's a small dock on the Buffalo defense, like it's just going to be a more exciting game essentially. There have been a handful of primetime slates that are like this. I think a few years ago, it was, I believe, Chiefs Rams, where there were 3 defensive touchdowns in a game that scored like over 100 points.
Interesting. Yeah, I also agree with what you said on Wolford, and that's something that's going to make it, and we'll get to defenses later, is I think that some of these teams, like we're looking at Buffalo's defense, or maybe even like the Rams defense as more of a contrarian play. I kind of want to try to find some of these defenses that have less ownership, that are just in a spot where the quarterback's going to have to potentially throw the ball a lot. And with Russell Wilson, at least this year, we've seen more of a concerted effort for him to throw the ball. So that could make the Rams a little bit more of a contrarian play on defense, but we'll hit on that a little bit more later. We've got the wide receiver position coming up next. And this is where I think all of the leverage is gained on the slate. This is where I think is the most interesting position. As I mentioned at the top, we have 2 wide receivers came into the day listed as questionable. Mike Evans banged up with a knee injury last week. He is expected to play. Cole Beasley, also a knee injury. He is active for today's game. Now, with that said, how healthy are they? I do not know. I do know that the field does not trust them and they're not picking up much ownership. I'm going to see if we have updated ownership projections, because at least before the show, they were both coming in close to 10%. I'll see if that's changed. It's updating on my screen. All right. Well, anyway, more important thing is that it looks like neither of them are going to be massively popular for this slate, at least not as popular as they would have been if they were going to be in. And I love, too, how just my computer just craps out midway through the show where it's like, I'm going to refresh a page. And it's like, no, you're not. You're not going to refresh that page. You think you need valuable information? You're not going to be able to have it. So with Cole Beasley and Mike Evans, I'll lead with this as I'm trying to figure out why my computer isn't refreshing. Which of them are you more confident being healthy? And do you think they're going to be limited at all?
Which am I more confident being healthy? Oof. I don't think I don't have any confidence that they're healthy. I only have confidence, like you said, that the field definitely does not see them as healthy. We have Cole Beasley actually getting up to 27.6% ownership, but at his price, I mean, this is a dude who got one all-pro vote. I mean, we've got to be playing guys who are getting all-pro votes now. I mean, at his price at 5,300, he's a guy who has 100-yard and touchdown upside, even with Diggs on the field. Like, he has multiple double-digit target gains. And I do think, yeah, sure, John Brown coming in to the lineup does like hurt his overall projection. But given John Brown at 41%, like, do we think he's that much more likely at essentially the same price? There's 600 difference. So maybe it gets you from Cam Akers to Ronald Jones or whatever. Do we think John Brown is that much more likely to outscore Cole Beasley? Even if we don't think Cole Beasley is perfectly healthy, I think that is worth the risk. At Mike Evans' ownership, 16% when we have Antonio Brown ahead of him. I assume we have Chris Godwin ahead of him as well. Yeah, we have Chris Godwin ahead of him as well. I like both of them because, like you said, I really don't think there are a ton of like awesome leverage points on this slate. If Cole Beasley goes out, drops 100 yards and a touchdown, and John Brown goes 2 for 20, Cole Beasley lineups will be destroying all the John Brown lineups. 41% of lineups will be cut off of the slate, those being the John Brown lineups, and the 27% of Cole Beasley lineups will be the only ones that will be winning. So I like that sort of just direct leverage point off of a John Brown, who I also have a lot of because I have a lot of Josh Allen, but I will be more over the field on Cole Beasley by a pretty significant margin. The same thing with Mike Evans. Like, his target share, his air yard share have both dominated since Antonio Brown joined the lineup. Even if he's not at 100% health, 16% Mike Evans on a slate that's like Stephon Diggs can be 70. We have 70% ownership on Stephon Diggs. I don't even think that's terrible. It's just that, like, when you can get a guy who has a similar-ish upside, like we know Mike Evans, I think he has like 180 yards in a game a few weeks ago. If you have that kind of upside, even if maybe it's a little harder to achieve because you're banged up, at 16%, you just kind of have to, like, I think in tournaments, you kind of have to jam these guys. Like, these are how you're going to win the slate. Even if it doesn't hit, if we play this slate over 10 times, in one of them, Mike Evans will be healthy enough to post a big game. And I won't say you will win tournaments. You'll put yourself in positions to win tournaments.
All right, so we have a way different situation now because I think I must have been pressing refresh on the page just as ownership was updating, and that's why my computer kind of stalled for a second, but we've got updated ownership now. Mike Evans is right around 16% on both FanDuel and DraftKings. Cole Beasley coming in at nearly 30% ownership now on FanDuel and DraftKings. So this is now going to change a lot because, I mean, when I looked at it 10 minutes ago, we had Cole Beasley at 10% on both sites, and this also brings down John Brown's ownership slightly, not really that much, though. He's still coming in around 40% on DraftKings and FanDuel. He just dropped a couple percentage points on each site. So this is a totally different situation than it was just a few minutes ago. Cole Beasley, and I think it makes sense to an extent, right? Because as we were starting the show, that was just after it was announced that Cole Beasley was going to be active. And now we have a situation where Cole Beasley, a little bit of time has sat in. People are more aware of the news. The ownership is updated to reflect that. So now that we know that Cole Beasley is nearly 30% owned, how do you feel about him? Because he was somebody who, coming into the show at 10% owned, I was overweight to the field on. But now that he's nearly 30%, I'm slightly underweight to the field on him just because there are still some of those injury risks. But before, it was something that when he was so low owned, it was something that I still just made me overweight to the field on because I'm around 20% in my lineups on FanDuel and DraftKings. But now that his ownership's gone up, I end up slightly overweight to the field on him because I'm not really going to be adjusting for what that ownership is. Because I don't want to hike up Beasley just to try to get over the field on him because I still have some concerns with the knee. So now I feel like he's gone from massively under-owned to a little bit over-owned. How do you feel about the new ownership on him?
I actually still think I know for a fact I'm going to be over the field on him. I do think it's not as appealing. 10% Cole Beasley was like a complete jam. 30% Cole Beasley is, I still think maybe less than efficient because I think he's one of the players in his range that actually has he has 5 100-yard games this season, 4 or 5 touchdowns. He has an upside that literally does parallel guys like Stephon Diggs and Mike Evans. At his price, if we knew he was healthy at his price, he'd be 70% owned. He would be one of the highest owned players on the slate, maybe 60 or 50, whatever. So I think maybe the upside of him being healthy is still worth chasing at this ownership. But yeah, I'm definitely less excited about him. And I think versus the field, I may end up having more Mike Evans because Mike Evans, and maybe people aren't late swapping, especially don't have a ton of options by the time Mike Evans gets announced active. So I don't think his ownership updates a ton, if at all, really, because lineups are mostly going to be set in stone. I probably end up being more over the field on Mike Evans because you're still just getting a very big discount in terms of ownership on how worried people are. We should be just as worried about Mike Evans as we should as Cole Beasley, but because Cole Beasley is the player who gets officially announced active at the start of lineups locking, he's the one who's going to be more popular by a pretty significant margin. So I guess I'm still over the field on Cole Beasley because I think his upside is probably unchanged because he still has the chance to come out at 90% health or whatever. But Mike Evans isn't going to get the ownership bump, so he's probably the better leverage point.
So here's the one issue I have with Mike Evans, at least compared to Cole Beasley, and why I do like Cole Beasley a little bit more. Number one, obviously the price difference. Cole Beasley is way cheaper. Yeah. But then number two, the Bucs wide receivers are a nightmare to figure out just in a normal situation. I never know what to make of Antonio Brown, Rob Gronkowski, Mike Evans, and Chris Godwin. I mean, all of these guys are viable targets on any given slate. So when all of them are in there, it's something I don't generally like to target all that much. And now we're also adding an injury to Mike Evans in the mix. And I just don't know what to make of any of it. I never get these wide receivers right. So it's something that I generally kind of try to go elsewhere. Now, with that said, it's a 3-game slate, so I can't totally avoid them. But I still ended up with not that much Mike Evans exposure. The wide receiver I ended up playing the most is Antonio Brown from Tampa Bay. I just feel like he's somebody who, especially in recent weeks, it seems like there's been more of a concerted effort from Tom Brady to get the ball to Antonio Brown. I understand he had apparently some incentives in his contract last week that probably inflated his targets a little bit. But still, even before that week, it was 14 targets from last week, then the weeks before 6 targets and 7 targets. Antonio Brown, who's also the cheapest of the 3 wide receivers, is the one that I am most comfortable with. Between Evans and Godwin, who do you prefer on this slate?
For me, it's mostly Mike Evans, specifically because of ownership. When Antonio Brown joined the team, so I believe that was week 9, then going through week 16 because Evans played, I believe, 2 drives in week 17. So I don't think that data is awfully informative or predictive going forward. Evans had a 22% target share, a 29% air yard share. Neither Godwin nor Brown were over 20 in either of those. So not only were they not getting a ton of targets, but they weren't going massively downfield either. So they were getting middling value targets, whereas Mike Evans was getting the most targets and getting them downfield, which is going to result in bigger plays. And we know they use him like a pseudo goal line back, sort of the way that Devontae Adams gets used, where if you're inside the 5, most teams are well, let's just pound it into the back of our right guard. They're going to go to Mike Evans on a decent amount of these plays. If they're going to do that again, which maybe they don't, maybe that's not the case. Mike Evans actually comes out and plays a decoy and I lose some lineups. Maybe that's the case. I think it is ownership. That upside is worth chasing. I do agree, though, in terms of Brown versus Godwin, I'll just take the cheaper one. Their volume is very close to the same. They're just hovering in that just sub 20%, both air yards and target share category. I'll just take the cheaper one. And I think he's going to be lower owned. So I don't really think there's a reason outside of just getting into that deep of your lineup. You could, but I wouldn't be building all of my lineups with Brown. But if I'm choosing one or the other, if I have a single entry, I'd go Brown over Godwin for sure. Evans probably in line with Brown because there is definitely some risk with him and his price is higher.
All right. I want to address the super chat we got really quick from Jason Hoffman in the YouTube chat. Are there any tight ends that you like other than Logan Thomas on DraftKings? A little out of order, but we'll address the super chat because we're getting closer to lock. For me, though, the tight end that I have the most exposure to outside of Logan Thomas on DK is Tyler Higbee. I also think that Rob Gronkowski is a decent play in this spot. So Tyler Higbee, just if we're going really cheap at tight end, he is somebody whose targets have been pretty decent in recent weeks relative to the position. 4 targets, 6 targets, 5 targets. So he is my second favorite tight end on DraftKings. Do you prefer Gronk to Tyler Higbee? Or is there somebody else that stands out to you?
I prefer Gronk as actually, I think, my highest owned tight end on the slate. Okay. I have some Logan Thomas, but I just think if Gronk goes out and scores a touchdown, he probably immediately beats out Logan Thomas unless you get a 10 catch game from Logan Thomas, because Thomas isn't awfully likely to score. Like, he's not his team's number one receiver. It's not like he's like Travis Kelce, George Kittle, and his team isn't projected to put up points. I believe they're the lowest implied team total. Like, they could be competing with John Wofford for lowest implied team total and still score fewer points. So because we don't project them to score a lot, I think his upside is incredibly capped as the highest price tight end of the slate. And Gronk, although he certainly is not going to be his team's, I don't know, first, second, or third receiver at best, he gets used where it counts. He's like one of the highest ADOT tight ends since Antonio Brown joined the team, and he's second on his team in red zone targets. So he gets money touches. He doesn't get a lot. He's not going to out target 2 or 3 of the players on his team, whereas that's pretty much the median projection for Logan Thomas. But he gets the money touches. He goes downfield. That gives him a decent chance at the 100-yard bonus, which I think he got versus like the Chiefs. And he gets a lot of end zone opportunities. So I think at his price, his ceiling is just as high as anyone else. And I'll have to check our ownership on like the middling tight ends, like a Dawson Knox, who I don't like dislike or anything, but like he's projected in the same ownership range as Dawson Knox and Tyler Higbee. I think I'd probably rank them Gronk as a massive favorite, then probably Higbee, Knox. I don't have a big preference between those two, but I'm just surprised that people aren't more gravitating towards Gronk at a 3,900 price when we know he gets money touches.
All right, so let's get back to the other wide receivers. Now, I just wanted to address that super chat really quick. Something else, guys, 20 minutes into lock, it looks like there's going to be a decent amount of overlay on FanDuel in their Millie Maker contest, which doesn't actually pay out $1 million to first, but whatever, that's kind of about what the industry standard is for calling those contests. So that's something that I wanted to bring to everybody's attention. That is over 400,000 entries, and it's just slightly below 300,000 now. So with 20 minutes left until lock, I feel pretty confident that is going to overlay a little bit. Talking about the top of the wide receiver position, Stephon Diggs, who is the highest projected ownership player on the slate, coming in at 70% on both FanDuel and DraftKings. What did you do with Diggs? Because I think that he's obviously a very good play on the slate. There's no denying that. The ownership is also really high. So where did you come in on him? I'm about even with the field. I have him at about 75%. So a little bit overweight, but it's hard to get massively overweight unless you're just locking him in because his ownership is so high. So where did you settle on Diggs in terms of how much exposure you wanted to get to him?
Yeah, I think I'm in like 90% range. And most of my non-Diggs lineups aren't even lineups without Josh Allen. They're lineups that I went with like a different way to get Josh Allen unique. And I did Cole Beasley, Dawson Knox, John Brown, Cole Beasley, stuff like that. So I think even like some of that is not fading the Bills. It's just saying, well, how can I make a different, how can my 40th, 50th Josh Allen lineup be one that's not going to be duped or whatever? I didn't even I didn't even try and get him there. It's just that like when you run the projections, if you run 150, you're getting nearly all of him because like at his price, he's probably still a better play. Like he's definitely a better play at his price than DK Metcalf, than Tyler Lockett, given what we know about the team. Not supposed to score a lot, but still could run the football a lot. Like I didn't make it a point to do it. It's that the math made it a point to get him in a lot of my lineups. So I didn't lock button him, but I got damn near close just by him being the best play of the slate.
So the next tier of wide receivers then is DK Metcalf and Terry McLaurin. Frankly, I don't understand why the ownership is all that close between the two of them. I think that DK Metcalf is a far better play for this slate. They're priced about the same. The ownership is about the same. And then you also have to consider with DK Metcalf, I mean, he's Russell Wilson as his quarterback. Terry McLaurin is either a banged up Alex Smith or it's Taylor Heineke throwing him the football. So when you compare those two and just that as is, DK Metcalf was the better fantasy wide receiver this year. I don't understand why these two are being viewed as equal plays. Is there something I'm missing here? Why do you think the ownership is so close?
I mean, I can tell you Terry McLaurin's air yard share is bonkers. I mean, it's 47%. If you rule out Michael Thomas, who played 7 games, that's 5% ahead of the next closest player, which I think is Devontae Adams. No team in the NFL or no player in the NFL controls more of his team's like ability to move the football than Terry McLaurin. That's what I'll tell you about the good side of it. The bad side of it is his team isn't going to have like a super high ADOT if they have Alex Smith, and they're going to have a bad quarterback if they don't have Alex Smith. So that's the downside. And I do think they should be, I don't know. I think I'm a little more interested in Terry McLaurin because of that air yard share and because I kind of agree that any team on this slate is going to be throwing aggressively, even if they're down 21 in the fourth quarter. Unlike a team like if Jacksonville was ever down 21 in the fourth quarter, they're going to give James Robinson 5 carries on a drive and punt and then go home. It's probably not the case here, but I do think this is one that I may end up swapping off some Terry McLaurin as we get closer to lock, find out that if Alex Smith isn't playing, because yeah, that is a bad scenario to get, even if he has high market share. Like the value of any given target, given his team isn't projected to score a lot and that his quarterback is potentially going to be the worst starting quarterback of wildcard weekend, it's not very valuable. As much as I like his volume, every volume has a discount or a bonus that comes with it. DK Metcalf's volume comes from a top 5 quarterback. Terry McLaurin's comes from like a bottom 5 out of 50 quarterback potentially. So I may have to readjust in this a little bit because I have a lot of McLaurin.
All right. And guys, please do us a favor. Like the video. We have got 2,400 people watching, 522 likes. So let's get the likes up a little bit. And I'm going to give you the Terry McLaurin and DK Metcalf, the most updated ownership projection. So do us a favor and give us a like. So Terry McLaurin at 6,300 projected for 34.4% ownership on DraftKings. DK Metcalf, who people don't know this, the entire site is named after him. He is only projected for 27.8% ownership at 6,700. So, I mean, we're looking at Terry McLaurin projected for 7% more ownership. And I understand some people in the YouTube chat are bringing up concerns. What about Jalen Ramsey and also that DK Metcalf struggled against him in previous matchups? It's hard for me to care all that much about it, especially when we consider that I'm more concerned about the Washington's quarterback situation than I am about Jalen Ramsey guarding DK Metcalf, because that to me is the real mess on the slate. We don't know who's starting. We don't know who is starting, if it's Alex Smith, if he's going to be compromised at all, because frankly, he didn't look all that good when he was on the field last week. So there's concerns there. And I understand that maybe you're a little uncomfortable with DK Metcalf and him being covered by Jalen Ramsey, but by the same merit, I don't understand how you're comfortable with Washington's quarterback situation. So I think that DK Metcalf, also who I think of as a better player of the two between him and McLaurin, and that's not taking away anything from McLaurin, but I think DK Metcalf is one of the very best wide receivers in the NFL. So just considering the ownership, I'm a little bit overweight to the field on Metcalf. I'm a little bit underweight to the field on Terry McLaurin. That is the stand that I took. Some of the other wide receivers here. What did you do with the Rams situation? So Cooper Kupp, Robert Woods, I'm underweight to the field on both of them. Another one where I found it hard to trust the quarterback situation where Jared Goff, who's largely been inconsistent this year. There was a little bit of upside there, but still he's dealing with a thumb injury. If he's out, then you've got Wolford at quarterback. That's a total disaster for the passing game. I have minimal amounts of exposure to Woods and Kupp, but underweight to the field on both of them. Did you feel any differently?
Nope, I have very little of those guys because I like Terry McLaurin because even if his quarterback is bad, he's going to get the ball like a ton, at least in terms of they're going to try to get him the ball a ton. They're going to try and generate a ton of yardage through him. We can't even make that kind of definitive statement with Cooper Kupp, Robert Woods. They're going to split the lead receiver role, and neither of them go downfield very much at all. They both have low ADOTs and good, not great target shares. When you combine that with bad quarterback play, you're competing for a good but not great share of what could be a horrible pie. So I don't think that was really worth chasing. I'm with you. I didn't rule them out. I have very little of them. And I'm looking, I have like 10% Cooper Kupp. Even that feels like I might actually like swap down from a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, so I think just based on the price points that there's only 3 games, I didn't totally X them out of my player pool. But I mean, relative to the ownership too, we have both of them were somewhat popular. I mean, Robert Woods, 18% on DraftKings, and Cooper Kupp is at bringing up his latest ownership. I don't even see him on here, but I think it was 12% if I remember the last time I looked. So I'm underweight on both of those numbers. It's a little bit too much. I mean, there's just so many good wide receiver plays in the mid-range. I mean, I talked about how much I don't like Terry McLaurin earlier relative to DK Metcalf, but I prefer McLaurin to Kupp and Woods. So that was where I stood there. Somebody who we're seeing a lot of people ask about in the chat, and it makes sense because he's one of the more popular plays on the slate, John Brown, who now that we have this information that Cole Beasley is going to be playing, I still think John Brown is a very good play, especially if you're looking to save money at wide receiver. But I do think that it takes a little bit away from John Brown now that we know that Cole Beasley is going to be in there and active. There's just less targets to go around. So do you ding John Brown at all for Cole Beasley playing?
Yeah, I think you have to. Like, you add more players who have the ability to take targets away from him. Yeah, they don't really play a ton of the same role, but just if you have more talent, like the reason I think Terry McLaurin has such a high air yard share is because they're not going to throw to freaking Steven Sims whenever Terry McLaurin is on the field. When Cole Beasley is on the field, he's going to draw targets, and those probably come more likely at the expense of someone like John Brown. So I still think John Brown is a good play, but I end up coming in. It looks like I'm coming in under the field on him and over the field on Beasley. That's kind of the flip I've made because I've already really played a ton of chalk with Josh Allen. So I'm trying to get different elsewhere. It's a lot of Josh Allen spawn dig stacks and usually throwing in a second guy. Some of it, yeah, a little bit of Dawson Knox, but mostly Cole Beasley, and then still a decent amount of John Brown, just not as much as the field is.
Yeah, the field is really high on John Brown. That made it a little hard for me to get there.
Yep.
Here's something, because we're seeing some people in the chat, they're saying Brown over Beasley, Beasley over Brown. If you're playing a single entry lineup and you could only play one of Cole Beasley or John Brown, which of them would you be choosing for single entry?
I guess kind of depends on the single entry, even, because like if it's a 1,000-man single entry, like the $12 1,200-man tournament, I'll probably play John Brown. Like I do think he's almost certainly a much safer selection. But like the largest single entries on DK are like 24,000 people or whatever. You still need an incredible amount of leverage. 1 out of 24,000 is like a mind-bendingly small percentage chance to win. I think Beasley would be like a far better leverage play. So in the largest single entry, I'd go Cole Beasley, but anything like a few thousand, it probably is John Brown. Like he is just a better, safer, and similar projected play.
Yeah, so before the show, it would have been Cole Beasley for me. But the difference now is, now that the ownership projection has gone up on Beasley, it's gone down on Brown a little bit. Now I just feel more comfortable with Brown. So the price on them is about similar. And now we've got Brown projecting for around 35% ownership and Cole Beasley coming in just under 30. So with that in mind, I feel better about John Brown. When it was John Brown over 40%, Cole Beasley at 10%, Beasley looked like the stronger play to me, but not the case anymore. But either way, I think both of them certainly in play. Any other wide receivers that you have a good amount of exposure to? T.Y. Hilton, I have in run back. Same with Michael Pittman. I didn't really roster them too much outside of Bills Colts stacks. I know we've had some people in the chat asking about Zach Pascal. Maybe people are interested in Isaiah McKenzie because of the injury situation with Cole Beasley. Any of these guys stand out to you? There's nobody else who I really have a significant amount of exposure to.
Yeah, I've pulled up our projections, but Pittman was just one of the best like points per dollar value receivers. So I got a lot of him. And he also made sense in the context of my lineups. I want the Colts to keep up. And if that happens through one long touchdown to Pittman, that's very good, both in terms of just the value it generates, but also the correlation it has with my quarterback. And even in my non Josh Allen lineups, I still almost have like a bill, if not multiple bills in all of those lineups. So I end up getting a decent amount of Pittman. I'm probably a little over the field on T.Y. Hilton simply because he correlated with my Josh Allen, not because I think he's some sort of smash play.
Yeah, and so I do have more exposure to the field than Michael Pittman, but it's mostly because of the amount of exposure that I have to Josh Allen. So Michael Pittman only projecting for 3% ownership on FanDuel. On DraftKings, he's at 9% ownership. Those are really low numbers. So Michael Pittman, who I only have in groups with Josh Allen, I still end up being overweight to the field just because of how low owned he is. So if you are going off the board and picking one cheap wide receiver, I do think Michael Pittman is the guy to go to. Let's see, just reading through the comments really quick, see if there's any other questions. T.Y. Hilton, how much do you like him today? Did you get more? I'll phrase it this way. Did you prefer further salaries? Did you end up getting more exposure to Pittman or Hilton? I ended up with more Pittman.
I didn't more Pittman too. It's just like we literally had him projected as like a top 2 or 3 value at wide receiver. I have a decent amount of Hilton too. They group well with the types of lineups I'm playing because I'm playing a lot of Bills. But I didn't think the split between them was nearly as great as either their price or more specifically their ownership. The ownership just was not high at all on Pittman, despite him like letting you play a ton of good plays. So I probably am with or maybe above the field on Hilton. I'm way above the field on Pittman just because he's not popular enough, I don't think.
Yeah, I agree. And by the way, because we got Chris Spags in the chat now, we've got everybody in the chat's calling for Money Hat, which is really one of the worst bits going on in the DFS industry right now. But
what is this bit? I don't know what this bit is.
Spags basically has a hat that he wears backwards and has a money sign on the front. And then when we get a certain number of likes, he turns it around and shows the money hat. But the people seem to love it. So who am I to poo-poo on it? But it is corny, but the people love it. And it does make me laugh when I'm doing the shows with Chris Spags also. So and there we go. There's the one sound drop we have. We also have we also have the money sound drop, which also plays into the bit as well. Let's talk about defenses here. We've hit on everything else so far. What did you end up doing here? Because I'm never really all that confident in defenses. I usually like to spread it around a little bit. Just for the reference of everybody, the chalk of the slate is the Seahawks and Buccaneers. And then we kind of have lower ownership basically on every other defense. Do you think the chalk here makes sense? Is there a defense that isn't going owned that you really like a lot?
Yeah, the chalk definitely makes sense. You're just face the two backup or injured starting quarterbacks. I mean, Rams as like the contrarian play, I think makes a little bit of sense. They have an incredible defense. It's just can they capitalize on that versus the Seahawks? They're underdogs. They don't they don't have a great like team total as a team, so they don't look to be that successful. But they're facing the worst favorite of the main slate or of the Saturday slate. So actually, I think the worst favorite of the entire slate too. So in terms of if you're picking an underdog team to face off against a defense, it's definitely the Rams versus Seattle. They're not crazy expensive. So I do think I'd have to check. I'm probably over the field on them. Bills probably make a decent amount of sense too. I think Rams Bills make a lot of sense because Bills, it's simply that we talked about it earlier. If your opponent isn't Patrick Mahomes and is going to be throwing a ton, they have a decent chance to take some sacks, throw some interceptions. And those are where like the big money plays as a defense come from. You want sack fumble sixes, you want pick sixes. So Bills, maybe people are getting priced out of them or just are more excited to face the backup quarterbacks. But I'll have to check. I hope I came in over the field on the Bills because at 9%, like big favorites, not a bad defense by any means. They make a lot of sense. I don't know if I have like any Colts or maybe I have some Washington. I know I don't have any Colts.
Yeah, so we have the Bills are projected for 15% ownership on FanDuel. They are projected for 9% ownership on DraftKings. I agree with you. I think the game script sets up pretty well for them. It's also a thing like I don't want to have like 50% of any of the defenses. It's just such a random position that's hard to predict. But I do think if you're playing one lineup in GPP and you generally don't want to just roster the highest owned defense, I think the Bills are the one. I agree with you. That makes the most sense from an ownership perspective. They're going to probably be leading for most of the game. They're favored by 7 points. We've got a fairly mistake-prone quarterback going up against them, Phillip Rivers. How many times have we seen Phillip Rivers in a big game just make a horrendous decision in the fourth quarter where he throws an interception, takes a bad sack, fumbles? So there's going to be situations where the Bills are going to be set up to potentially get sacks and turnovers late in the game. I think that they make a lot of sense as a contrarian defense. Here's one other defense question I'll ask you. If you had to roster one of these defenses in a cash game, which would you pick? I think it would be the Buccaneers for me in that situation.
Yeah, probably the Bucs. I would imagine they face the worst quarterback play. They're the biggest favorites. And I mean, they're probably like in terms of like football guy things, if not the best defense, probably the second best defense. So it's matchup. The price isn't bad. Yeah, they're probably the best, safest play.
All right. So we've got now everybody's bringing up the money hat in chat. The people love it. This is the people want money hat. So here's what we're going to do. All right, let's play into the money hat bit a little bit here. Let's close this out with the money hat stack of the slate. So if you have one stack quarterback to either say one or two of his pass catchers, who are we going with as the money hat stack of the slate?
So we've talked about it all slate. It has to be Josh Allen and it probably has to be Stephon Diggs, but let's go with the full onslaught. The Bills go out and put up 35. Let's go Allen, Diggs, Beasley, and Dawson Knox.
All of them together.
We've seen that really, and I'm trying not to say this has happened before. It's going to happen again, but more that it's a viable thing to happen. We saw it when the Bucs were on the Saturday slate, when the Texans were on the Thanksgiving slate, and when Josh Allen was on the Monday doubleheader. All of those games or all of those slates featured full onslaughts winning lineups, like 4 or 5 players from the same team winning lineups, because they had a dynamic where they were just overall as a team, the highest scoring team of the slate by a considerable margin. So I'm not saying that is always going to work. I'm trying not to be too recency biased based on the small sample of 3 slates I can name, but just generally, if the Bucs don't go out and put up a ton of points, it doesn't look like anyone else is going to contend with the Bills for scoring. So even one touchdown from kind of a mediocre Bills player could be enough to put them as the 4th Bill in the optimal lineup.
Oh boy, so we've got all things in here. Spag's upset that we're appropriating money hat culture. People are sending us super chats just saying money hat. So apparently the money hat, we really have to lean into this. Kyle, next time we're doing a show together, I don't want to see a man bun. I want to see a hat covered. I want to see a money hat covering your hair. We're gonna have my short haircut, which is, by the way, generating all kinds of conversation in the chat right now. We could have my hair covered up with a money hat. I guess this just has to be the thing now. But for me, the money hat stack of the slate. So here's something I did in some lineups that I think really makes sense for tournaments. As much as I like Stephon Diggs and I have about the same exposure to the field as him, I think that Josh Allen stacked with John Brown and Cole Beasley without Stephon Diggs, I think that's a very high upside, three-man stack. So that's something I did in a handful of lineups. I think that's a way to make Bills stacks that differentiate yourself from the field a little bit, is if you have lineups with Josh Allen that don't have Stephon Diggs. I think there's a lot of upside there. And that's gonna bring us to lock here. We have hit 105, which is when the game starts today. I wasn't totally sure. It was like halfway through because we had the news guy El Negro Loco who called a little early. He was like, "Hey guys, we're at lock." I was like, "What time do the games lock today?" I was a little thrown off by that. But yeah, so 105 start times today. Guys, don't forget, celebrate 2021 with Awesemo Plus. Get 21 days of Awesemo Plus for only $20 when you use the promo code 2021 at checkout. This gives you access to everything Awesemo Plus has to offer, including player projections, ownership projections, lineup builder, and much more. And also, if you're looking to get a yearly pass, you can get the Awesemo Plus yearly platinum pass with the promo code HAPPY. This will give you 20% off the Awesemo Plus yearly platinum pass. This is going to be our only discount for the yearly pass, so don't miss out on it. That's going to wrap up the show today. So guys, enjoy the first slate of NFL playoffs. For me and Kyle, that will do it. Jordan, play the music out.